I would like to call the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee meeting of December 4th to order, and I would like to begin by reading a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers to the nearest exit through the chamber doors and obey all instructions given, and if assistance is required, please see our clerk, Trish Sarnicki. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Please note that the Town of Lincoln Committee and Council meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. I would like to thank the public for attending this meeting this evening, and I would just like to remind everyone of our rules of engagement to please be respectful while others are speaking, and please refrain from clapping. And please remember to silence all cellular devices. Roll call, we have regrets from Councillor Rinjema this evening. We have a number of staff in attendance, thank you. Item number 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. There are no statutory public meetings on the agenda this evening, and we have no delegations. We've now come to the consent agenda on the agenda. We have 3 items. Item 6.1, Public Works Quarterly Project and Program Update Q3, Q4 2019. Item 6.2, the Age-Friendly Citizen Committee Minutes of October the 3rd. And item number 6.3, Active Transportation Citizen Advisory Committee Minutes of October 17th, 2019. Would any member like to remove any items from the consent agenda to discuss? Councillor Pachariva.
Yep, thanks through you, Chair Bernier. I'd like to chat about 6.1, the Public Works Quarterly Project and Program Update, Q3, Q4, 2019. We've got our delegation here tonight that we're going to hear from later from the Active Transportation Citizen Advisory Committee. And there's some issues in this report that I'd like to look at through the AT lens.
Okay, Councillor, then we will look at that, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Bernier. So through you to Mr. Graham, there's a couple items. So Project 32 Green Lane Reconstruction Design, there's, in an overview view, there's listed cycling facilities. At our AT committee, we asked about dedicated cycling lanes or a cycling path, wondering if that was part of the design which the RFP was awarded in Q4.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. So, yes, through the design process, we're going to be looking at, what type of cycling facilities we could incorporate into the design. So, we are going to start that process. I think what we'd like to do too is have an opportunity to attend the Active Transportation Committee at the beginning of the design process and get their input, and we can share some ideas as we start that.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you, Dave, because that's what came up at our last meeting, is that the Citizen Advisory Committee would like to comment on not only these, but, and I see Councillor Foster here, but some of the regional rebuilds and as part of the region's redesign and rebuilds on roads, cycling lanes are usually part and parcel of that project and should be included. So they're looking forward to commenting on that. So same kind of question, Dave, with Project 35. So Rittenhouse Road, again, it had come up at our last infrastructure meeting about, no, not infrastructure, I'm sorry, capital budget, about including that and looking at it through a different lens, given it's a heavily trafficked street, there's children on there, there's seniors on there. Maybe we look at not allowing parking and look at it in a completely different way.
Through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, thanks for your question on that. And in follow-up to the specific committee meeting where that was raised by committee, we are going back and looking at another option that we can quantify what that might look like, and we'll be reporting back on that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again. Project 33, if I may, Chair Brunei, 33 and the Transportation Master Plan itself identified $1.5 million worth of upgrades with respect to active transportation. So will we be receiving, a printout, or is that part of the 10-year capital plan or the 5-year window on where those dollars will be spent?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor. So, yeah, the Transportation Master Plan looked at, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and with those costs. So, yes, that will be built into our capital forecast. I think what we'd like to do is, have a process where we're reporting back on, next year, the year after, what that looks like in terms of the budget.
Okay, because in the short term, in the 0 to 5 years, that figure was identified. So wondering if there's projects that go to building that budget, or is that the best case scenario?
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, yes, those are projects that will involve when we reconstruct roads, the sidewalks,
Okay.
all that kind of stuff. So, yes,
Okay.
that is dovetailing into that.
Okay, terrific. And if I may, Chair Brunei, got a couple more. Project number 7, Lincoln Avenue Storm Sewer. Mr. Graham, we know where we are on this. It says the design's complete, so a little update on that, given the history behind it.
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor, so what we want to do, we're preparing to do a public information center early January. We're just trying to get a date that is going to work for everybody. So we'll have an opportunity to, share with the residents and the public of what Lincoln Avenue, the design plans for upgrading that road, and that's from King Street to Elmview, just adjacent to the Lincoln Estates development, Lizani Home Development. So you can anticipate that PIC coming forward, and there'll be a lot more information to share on that as we get ready to go into the construction phase.
Okay, and through you, Mr. Chairman, the Fifth Avenue fire hydrant. So I see we're awarding that in 2020. I thought that became redundant based on the new Camden Fire Station and the cistern there.
Through Mr. Chairman to the councillor. So this project, is my understanding, our fire chief would still like to pursue this project for providing improved, fire protection above the escarpment, so they can fill their fire trucks above the escarpment versus driving down into the urban area. So I think what you're seeing with this project is last year we had tendered the project, and the project came in over budget. So we went back, worked with the region to look at where we could sort of modify the design and save some costs. So our intent is to re-tender that project, see what the prices come back like, and then that'll be coming forward to committee and council for consideration in terms of awarding that in 2020. So it's basically an update at this point in time to let you know that that's kind of the current plan with that project.
Okay. I've got Councillor Brunei, Chair Brunei, I've got 3 on the op side, but I'm going to step out and let some others, because maybe they'll hit these, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Councillor. So next in the queue, I have Councillor McPherson. Councillor, did you have something to talk about on the quarterly report, or did you looking to pull something else?
I jumped out and can you pop yours on? Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have several that I'd like to talk about with these projects as well. So thank you, Councillor, for bringing this up from the consent agenda. So if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, through to Director Graham, I had also flagged project number 35, the Rittenhouse Road project, and as Councillor Patriva referenced, the discussion at budget with regards to a dedicated bike lane. So my question is, that, only happening a couple of weeks ago with that discussion, where does that put us as far as the next steps that are listed here with an award tender Q1 of 2020? And also, what is the plan to to present the two options. Is that something that we can look to see in January, February, or what are we thinking? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. Yes, so the current update that you have before you tonight looks at awarding a tender early Q1, but, you know, now that we're going to take another look at, is there another option to do bike lanes on this street? And, you know, what does that look like? What are those impacts? We're looking at that now. So the tendering schedule would be pushed out to be able to do this, which is okay. And yes, we'll have to be reporting back once we have, you know, this information, another option, and we'll share that information in terms of, you know, what are the impacts around that option, costs, et cetera, and bring that information back, so.
Good, okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, on the Jordan Village Improvement Project, under the ongoing section. So in here, we've got detailed design to be completed Q1 2020, utility coordination planning stages ongoing, and then in the next steps, we've got utility relocation work planned for 2020. And my question is, how realistic is that? How confident are we that that will happen in 2020, the actual relocation of the utilities? And I'm assuming that's both 19th Street and Main Street, and I'm assuming there's a fair bit of coordination here with MPEI, with the region. There's probably a pretty significant communication piece here that has to happen. So we're in December now, so maybe if Director Graham could speak to what are kind of the timelines that you see for this pretty significant project to start.
Director Graham?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. So, yes, it is a large project. I mean, currently, right now, it's in our proposed 2020 capital budget, which, once we get that approved, we'll have the funding secured for sure to move forward with this project. We've been working closely with NPI. They have a design already done that they're ready to go to the market and tender with early next year. And that entails basically burying all the overhead wires, all the hydro wires. So that is ready to go and in place. We've met internally as a team to develop a communication strategy, because that's going to be really important to share with the residents in terms of what to expect with this project. Because when we bury the hydro, we're going to bury it on the streets, but we also have to bury the hydro to residents' homes. So we're going to come up with a package, if you will, of communication in terms of letting residents know, you know, what to expect, what's involved in that, and timelines. So our plan is to do the work next year for sure. Okay. Yes, and it will involve 19th Street and Main Street, where there's overhead wires.
You're confident that we're on track, we're in a good spot, and that things will start to roll out fairly early in the new year as far as communication, and then obviously the summer months we're going to be doing the work. Mr. Chair, one other project, if I can, and that is the Jordan Station and Camden II investigation study. And in there, we've got, under progress, we've got consultant reviewing results and developing proposed disconnection alternatives for council review and approval. Can you speak to what that is, Director Graham, please?
Through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. So basically, we have a consultant helping us on this, and they've done a lot of work out in the neighborhood of Jordan Station, and we're doing a sub pump inspection, trying to look at how sub pumps are connected to the sewer system. You know, are they adding water to the sewer system? That, you know, we're trying to look at those areas and look at strategies to dislocate, or sorry, not redirect those sub pumps. So, and we appreciate the residents have worked with us, cooperated with us, allowed us to look at some of their homes and give some advice on what's happening there. So our plan is coming back to committee and council next year with some type of a grant program that we want to pilot in this area, and it would be a program where we would help residents, redirect sub pumps and things like that. So there'll be more to come on that for sure, but council can expect that, going into late Q1, I would think, Q2, early
Okay.
Q2.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, one other question on that same project. So in here, we also referenced the Bridgeport pumping station upgrades, so proposed construction for 2020, and again, a partnered project with the region here. And in these next steps, we've got a PIC that's planned for Q2 2020, and then the construction for 2020. Is there any cause for concern that we're basically running a PIC in April, May, or June, that I would assume we're going to be looking for feedback from those that are participating in that PIC, take that feedback back, work on it, come back with a final plan in summer, late summer, and then when do we build? So the question is, how confident are we that the steps we're taking will allow for a build? And I guess with the region, are they in sync with this?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. Yeah, I mean, the region's been supportive. They're started the design on this project. We've made it a priority to the region that you need to keep this project moving. It's an important project for Jordan Station. But what we want to do in working with the region is get a PIC earlier in 2020. We'd like to see one late Q1, get to show residents, what is this going to look like, get input, inform residents of, what to expect during construction. And the last we heard from the region in terms of their project schedule, they're looking at maybe a late July kind of start, so late summer for construction. But I agree with you, we need to get the PIC out there early prior to construction. So that is something that we'll continue to ensure the region is on track with.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor McPherson. Councilor Michalak.
Thank you, Chair Brunet, through you to Director Graham. With regards to Project 12, Second Avenue Water Main and Road Replacement, construction's complete, it's on a maintenance period. Some of the feedback I'm hearing is one of the unintended consequences is that the road is freshly paved, there's a bit of a speed factor. As far as the maintenance period, how long is this maintenance period, and what are we maintaining? Are we taking traffic data to come up with a plan to possibly put a stop sign in that neighborhood?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, related to the maintenance period, so that's a standard contract requirement when we hire a contractor. Once the work is complete and everything is done properly and we're happy with the final product, it goes on a one-year maintenance period. So if there's any type of settlement or defects with the work, we inspect it a year later, make sure it's okay. If it isn't, then the contractor would have to fix any type of deficiencies. So that's kind of what is meaning by a maintenance period. In terms of speeding, we are doing speed counts out there to look at, how bad is speeding, to try and quantify, what's occurring on the street. And we're also looking at, we've had a request to look at an all-way stop at 2nd and 23rd. So we are doing that analysis to see if one would be warranted there or not. So that's kind of what's happening in terms of some of the traffic concerns and requests that we've received to date.
Okay, thank you, Director Dave. And if we can move on that, just because I'm hearing from residents that there's been definitely more traffic funneled down that road given the freshness of it, and you know, there's a lot of kids, a lot of younger kids, you know, using that road to travel to 20 Valley School. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Michalak. Seeing no further discussion, or Councillor Patriba, you wanted, some of your questions weren't answered? Okay, over to you.
Brene, I'd just like to actually give some props to Councillor Foster, who's in the crowd tonight. I didn't give him any love this morning on the radio, so he's here in person, so I might as well throw a bouquet to him, along with our staff, with respect to the Go Bus Stop sidewalk. It's fantastic. Sidewalks in, I see constantly people using it. It's a missing link that we identified. Chair Brene, last year at our active transportation, wasn't an advisory committee, but it was in its infancy, and that was one of the places we identified. So good kudos to everyone involved in that. It's dynamite. Just a couple ops questions, and again, I'm going to put my AT hat on because it came from committee, and I'm going to raise these. So with respect to intersection and crosswalk paint marking, wondering if we're able, and thinking operational and thinking budget, and I'm still wearing the budget hat in capital, if we can look at maybe some better paint so it will actually last longer. And then with respect to painting of the share the roads, that those maybe go up earlier in the process. So, I mean, last year we were painting share the roads in August. We missed the cycling season, right? We should be out there in April doing it. Same thing with street sweeping. So, you know, extending that, because with Ms. Fernandez sitting in the crowd and our climatic change workshop we had tonight, the rains that we're getting are causing sediment to get on the bike lanes, not only on our streets, but on the regional roads. And we've identified bike lanes, and we want to encourage people to take those routes. But if there's impediments and we only sweep it in the spring, it's not much good. So I'd ask that we look at that, and I'm good.
Thank you, Councillor Patriba. All good discussion on the quarterly works project and upgrade program update. So thank you very much, Director Graham. So we now have a motion that council receive for information the Public Works quarterly project and program update for Q3, Q4 2019, and I will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Timmers, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. So now we will require a mover for the motion to pass the remaining consent agenda items, and I will need a mover for that. Councillor Russell, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Item number 7 on the agenda, presentations. We now have one presentation this evening, which will be provided by Robert Salowich, the Program Manager for Transit Services for the Niagara region, to present regarding on-demand transit. And I also want to welcome Matt Robinson, the Director of the GO Implementation Office from Niagara. Welcome, gentlemen. Please come forward.
Thank you very much, and we're very happy to be back. I appreciate being given the time to speak at the committee this evening. As mentioned, my name is Rob Salowich, the Program Manager for Transit at Niagara Region. The last time we came, we gave a bit of an update as to what's happening with intermunicipal transit sort of as a whole, and we did a bit of a baseline on some of the things that we're working on, you know, most specifically the on-demand transit option that we're looking at for West Niagara. And again, that's what we're very happy to be back to speak to you about this evening. Give you some of the details and tell you where we're headed, both at the regional level and hopefully with the municipality as a partner as well. So really quickly, I'll give you a bit of a background, talk to you some of the differences about some fixed route versus on-demand transit, why we're looking at the company Via Mobility, why we've looked at them, specifically talk about the IMT West option, and then talk just a little bit about some of the next steps that are needed in order to progress. So originally, 2018, regional staff, along with the Intermunicipal Transit Working Group, had put together an implementation plan to enhance services for intermunicipal transit. Included in that was some connections with Pelham and Lincoln, as well as some form of a plan for Niagara West as a whole, as those communities don't have any form of intermunicipal transit at this time. In addition, Niagara Region has commenced with a governance review. We are expecting to have a recommendation come out of that study sometime in Q1, Q2 of 2020. Staff at the region, with support of the Intermunicipal Transit Working Group, has been conducting a feasibility study on-demand transit for West Niagara specifically, with also some additional options for the southern tier, most specifically Port Colborne, with a connection in Fort Erie. And as I touched on, this is a follow-up to our October 9th presentation that we had. There are a few items that are missing from this, and I think they're very pertinent to discussion. Since we were here last time, Niagara Region's Council has approved the on-demand concept from our perspective. They've approved Via Mobility as the company for us to sole source, and they've directed us to move forward in an attempt to secure the partnerships with those municipalities that would like to be involved in this pilot. So from our perspective, we're all moving forward to that. In addition, on just Monday night, we were at Pelham's Council, and their council also approved to join in the partnership on this program with us. That does include them winding down their existing Pelham Transit, so they will no longer operate fixed route transit once we're able to finalize and move forward in implementation. So that was really exciting for us. It's sort of the first official go-to and the first official ask, so it was nice to be able to get that one signing on. And just recently as well, Council in Grimsby has formalized their council strategic priorities, and one of them is an on-demand deployment. So they are looking, we'll be going there on December 16th to give a, quite similar presentation and ask with them as well. And based on that strategic priority, it definitely lends a little bit of confidence to that discussion if their council is already thinking the same thing. So unfortunately, when we submitted this presentation, those items hadn't happened yet, so sorry for a bit of the ad hoc additions to those. So fixed route versus on-demand, I believe I touched on this a little bit during my previous presentation, but there's some really major differences between the different types of services. And this slide's really meant to be a comparison from left to right. The points tend to align. With a fixed route, you have a very limited coverage area. You can only run a bus along a certain schedule, along a very predefined route, and those are the people that you can serve. With an on-demand service, the vehicle will route dynamically to where the trip requests are. So essentially, you can cover the entire municipality, which means every single one of your residents, regardless of what ward they're in or whether or not they were on any sort of existing fixed route. It doesn't matter. With fixed routes, the utilization of those vehicles really depends on those peak times. So, in the morning when people are going to work or to school or on their way home, with on-demand, it tends to spread out a lot more because people can go whenever they want, as opposed to only when the schedule allows them to go with a fixed route service. Again, with fixed route, we require 4 months worth of lead time in order to make a change to a schedule. This has everything to do with planning, scheduling those routes, taking them to the respective operators unions, getting that messaging out to the public so that they're aware that as of X date, their typical route will have changed. Whereas with on-demand, none of that really matters. We can make changes to the system dynamically. The only thing we need is time to notify the public if it's a change in a service parameter, for example. And the last piece is the data potential. So with a fixed route, when you go to get on that bus, you only know where that rider is going based on where they got on. They get counted as a passenger, as a boarding at that time. You have no idea where they were going, what the purpose of that trip was. You don't have any information. With on-demand, the very function of having it booked as both an origin and a destination, as well as telling you, what the utilization was, whether the person was, whether they're a senior or a teenager or maybe they're in a wheelchair, you get all of that information because there's a unique rider profile built into the system itself. So it provides significantly more data in order to make robust decisions, and you're not sort of, making sure that the wind's blowing the right way when you're making changes based on some schedules. So this slide is really just highlighting the different coverage areas that could be expected. So the red lines there, or the maroon lines, they really just highlight the existing U-Link service, meaning that only the residents who live roughly within a walking distance of that line get access to service. Whereas the larger polygon, the green area, highlights specifically every resident in your community can have access to this service. And that's one of the driving factors why we're looking at doing it, based on the low density nature of West Niagara as a whole. Running a fixed routes, from a regional perspective, certainly doesn't make a lot of sense to continue doing that. We hear a lot at Regional Council about empty buses, and that would be something that we would see an awful lot of just by the very nature of it being so far in between trips, and how few people relatively are close or able to access that service. So some of the benefits, specifically this is for the provider. So this would be, for the municipalities in this case. Again, I feel like a broken record, but it maximizes the coverage area. So it really is about providing equitable access for everyone in your community. And that's typically something that's very tough to do. Cost containment is another driving factor for the region. We watched what happened in Innisfil with their Uber model, and it was very exciting to see an opportunity in Ontario where on-demand took off, but they had a per-trip pricing model, which means you're a victim of your own success. The more trips you deliver, the higher the cost goes. And they set a budget, and then they came back and asked for more money. And then they set an even higher budget the next year, and then they came back and asked for more money mid-year again. The way that we're planning for this service, that's not an option. We are planning a service that has a fixed number of vehicles for a fixed number of hours at a fixed rate. So we know based on, what we're planning for the service, how many vehicles we need, what that cost is going to be, and it's set. If we got to the point, and even in building that, there is some buffer room for ridership growth. But even if we got to a point where the ridership was so successful that we were, maximizing out that system, there's other changes that we can make under this type of service. We can push out the maximum wait time, which for our studies purposes, we used at 1 hour. And for comparative sake, the U-Link service exists right now at an average of roughly 2.5 hours between vehicles coming by a specific spot. So we'd be looking at a significantly improved service level. And so again, we could change that. If an hour and we were at peak capacity, we could move it to 1 hour and 15 minutes or 1 hour and a half if we really wanted to free up some extra capacity in the system. And that's so that give us time to plan for additional dollars down the road if that was something that the respective groups wanted to pursue. But it doesn't pigeonhole a council to a point where staff has to come back or the region has to come back mid-year, ask for you to make an adjustment, or else the service would be canceled as of X date when you ran out of money. And just for context, that's essentially what happened with the region in our Niagara Specialized Transit service. We were operating on a per trip basis, like the Uber Innisfil model, and we ran into the same problem with them when AODA changed in 2017 and fare parity changed. We ended up with a ridership that exploded, and we had to come back mid-year. So we've learned from that. That is not something that we want to repeat with this, and that's why this model we find works much better than something that could happen with the Innisfil model. Of course, the ridership potential is there based on the modeling that we've done, and we were very conservative. We were looking somewhere in the 250 rides per day range. That's across West Niagara. But even if we were to interpolate and come down to a Lincoln number, that's still roughly 5 to 6 times the number of trips per day than you're seeing on your existing U-Link right now. The operating model is very flexible. So the way that this company, VIA, tries to schedule its routes, it prioritizes ride sharing. So it tries to channel requests for rides that are similar in the time of day. Maybe you want to ride at 10 a.m., but you're looking for one at 20 after. They'll say to you, it's available at 10:10. And that way they can just do a double pickup as opposed to, what would be sort of an Uber or a taxi service where it's just one person getting picked up at a time per vehicle. That's not how they do that. They prioritize and pride themselves on their ability to match up riders. But in addition to that, what they're asking riders to do for them is to operate in a corner-to-corner model, which means that where it's safe to do so, so where there's sidewalks and maybe where that rider doesn't require, wheelchair access, to walk 100 meters to the nearest major intersection. And it's by cutting out those little areas of the communities, of those subdivisions, that they end up saving a significant amount of time and then can go and make those rides match. And that's really one of the cornerstones of that service. And as I mentioned, because it's where it's safe to do so, if you were on a road with no curbs and no sidewalks, they would come right to the door as opposed to asking you to walk. So it's all built in the system. They know what sort of requirements you have based on your unique rider profile. In addition, this would eliminate the need for a separate specialized transit service. So ultimately, this is something that the region is looking at out a couple of years as well. But because there's wheelchair accessible vehicles in this fleet, riders would no longer be required to apply to a specialized transit service. It would just be one transit service for all users. And their needs would be documented in the app in their unique rider profile. So it eliminates the need to go to a doctor, and ask them to sign a form, and maybe even a financial cost of doing so, the time it takes to do that, the challenge that it is, especially for a lot of seniors or teens even to do that, to get somebody to take them out to do those things. So we're looking down the road, if everything's going as well as we expect it to, that we can just have an existing service for riders to use and not split them between two different yet very similar systems. While on-demand is new to Niagara, it is not new worldwide. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of deployments worldwide. The company we're looking at alone has 100 now. They're in everywhere from Lone Pine in Australia. They're in Arlington, Texas. They are in Beijing. They're in Berlin. They're in Chicago. They have a pilot in Sault Ste. Marie. They're in Quebec. So there are deployments all around. We are just a different type of pilot that we're looking at doing in Niagara, and that's what's really exciting. And it's a bit kitschy, but big data, I touched on it before. These companies want to make sure that they're working with the municipalities. Typically, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, they're coming whether you like it or not. And this company, it takes a different approach, and they say, we want to come facilitate the needs in your community, and the data is yours. You make decisions with it. It's yours. They'll help us build platforms and dashboards to make sure that we're tracking the things that are appropriate to be tracked. So the riders, again, I touched on it, unique rider profiles. This is really key, especially for people who require additional levels of accommodation. The vehicles are accessible. There's multiple booking options. So yes, this is a software-based platform. You can most certainly book your trips through the app, and in fact, generally that's preferable. However, for those people who may not be as tech savvy or who may not just be interested in going down that road, they operate a call center where reservationists are there to take the call, and they will input it into the system for you, and in real time, they'll give you the estimate vehicle arrival time. So there's no technology barrier there that might exist if we were to just say go with an Uber option, and all you have is that app, and there's not even a customer service option built into that app that can help you in real time. Same day service, so again, where it differs from specialized, where you have to book a day in advance at least, or as much as 2 weeks, because our specialized service, if you're not aware, is extremely busy. We basically operate at capacity at all times. This would not have that issue. At the day you make a request, you can book a trip, and within the hour, that vehicle will arrive. Based on our simulations, we were looking at a 20 to 30 minute average, even though we set the maximum to an hour. When we used sort of a medium demand scenario, which, when you start a brand new service, it's not going to start at that medium demand. So those numbers, I think, are even going to be more favorable once we move forward. The pricing would be consistent. So if anybody's ever taken an Uber, they are both demand responsive pricing and distance-based pricing. So when the TTC had a strike in Toronto and everybody decided they were going to take an Uber to work instead that day, and they all got hit with 5 times the pricing level because it's demand pricing. It's the same way when you go to buy a flight. If you're the first one to buy your flight, it's great. If you try and get one in the last 2 weeks of your flight, you're paying top dollar for that because there's very few seats left. This would be a fixed, fair amount We haven't worked out the exact details, but we're relatively confident it would be $3 for any trip within the municipality and $6 to a trip to another municipality. That's consistent with the existing fare structure in the rest of Niagara. So the Intermunicipal Transit Working Group has put together a harmonized fare structure, and this aligns perfectly with that, which is why we're thinking it just makes the most sense to dovetail this right into that existing fare structure. And again, I touched on real-time vehicle information. You know, if you have the app, you know exactly when that vehicle is going to arrive. You're not sitting outside waiting in a half-hour time window. You can see that. If in the case that you called in and the vehicle was going to be delayed, that same reservationist is going to call you back and say, you know, we know you told you 10:30, but the vehicle got caught up at the Allenberg Bridge, say, and you know it's going to be a few extra minutes. It'll be there by 1:45 type of thing, and it's all based on GPS data. So why use Via Mobility? Again, I touched on it. This company was the only company in the region, and the Intermunicipal Transit Working Group searched high and low for a company to do this. You know, if you look at the top right corner, the microtransit platform, or software as a service as they typically refer to it, in that space alone, there are a ton of companies. Everybody's got software. Everybody says their software is good. What we heard by talking to as many of those companies as we possibly could is they all consider Via their top competitor. None of them mention each other as a competitor. They all mention Via as the competitor. So as we went through that process, we sort of kept that in mind, that there's only one group that all these other companies are fearing as far as eating up their market share. Of course, they do consulting and planning. You know, there's lots of consultants out there. But where we really landed on this company is the region was concerned about trying something new and also taking on a capital investment to start. So buying new vehicles and opening up an operations center and all of these things, this company does all of that for you. So for the purpose of this pilot, they would be through their pilot or their partner with Mercedes. It would all be Mercedes Metris vans. So they would all be new. They'd all be in excellent condition. And they provide the drivers during this time as well. So after the pilot period is over, the entity, whether there's direction through a governance review or whether that's still the region or whoever it might be, can evaluate and say, does it make sense to still use this provider, or does it make sense to start bringing some of those things in-house? And if we bring them in-house, is there another software provider that makes as much sense? But realistically, if the pilot works like we expect it to work, even if we brought some of those functions in-house, it would be working because of Via's software. And likely we'd feel very comfortable in continuing on with their software, especially as I mentioned, they seem to be on all of their competitors' mind as to who to beat in this space. Just very quickly, this is just a quick map, I guess, of some of their deployments worldwide. The different colors really just represents the different types of deployments. So I mentioned they do software-only packages, as well as they do full, mobility or transportation as a service packages, where they're providing everything from software to drivers to customer service to vehicles. So they've got a wide variety of different types in different areas, and it's why they feel comfortable about helping to tailor a solution to a specific municipality. So let's talk a little bit about IMT West. And based on the region's feasibility study that we conducted, again, in partnership with the Intermunicipal Transit Working Group, we landed on the position that we can actually provide service to the entirety of Niagara West. And for the purposes of this, we considered that Lincoln, West Lincoln, Grimsby, Pelham, and Wainfleet. The challenge is that the region only has the jurisdiction to operate inter-municipal trips, so trips from one city to another, or trips between cities. Where we need support is from the local municipalities. And by a reallocation of your existing transit levy, that financial contribution allows for those intra-municipal trips, or those trips within your municipality to take place. And so really what you get out of that is you get one system for any trip type within West Niagara, as opposed to what we currently have in the other side is sometimes you're taking a Niagara Region bus, sometimes you're taking a Niagara Falls Transit bus, sometimes that Niagara Region bus looks like a Welland bus because they're operating it for us that day, and it gets very confusing from a rider perspective. all of that would be gone. It would be one service, one app, one phone number, one fair price. Everything would be consistent and be easy. So that's really the seamless rider experience. And our goal is to provide connectivity. And that connectivity is to local businesses, it's to the GO stations, it's to the other areas of Niagara, it's to friends and family members and to people's churches and to wherever else they may want to go. By working together, we can provide that connectivity. It's when we start doing things separately that we start having to make these jurisdictional decisions. When you're looking from the outside in, you recognize they make no sense, but when you're sort of stuck in the letter of the law, sometimes you don't really have much else of a choice. And that's really why we're here trying to support this integrated option today. Again, we've recently received that approval by Regional Council. We're expecting budget to be approved on December 12th for that. Originally, we had intended to launch this program in September of 2019, so just this September just passed. But we went back and did a little bit of additional analysis because we realized that we were missing out if we don't bring in some of the local municipalities and partner and handle those intra-municipal trips. We started out, it was maybe a little bit, self-centered. It was the region looking for a regional solution. And as we started to go through, we were about midway through the summer, and it was clear that that was not the way to go. We're doing all of this work on the other side regarding governance and working together. We've got the Intermunicipal Transit Working Group. Why would we do something as a separate entity at this point, given all that work that we've already done? So the purpose of this pilot is really to test the feasibility of this company's software at providing an on-demand transit. Again, the benefit of going with this company is that there's no capital acquisition costs at the start, which is a significant cost of getting started, especially when you're talking about wheelchair accessible vehicles. There's a significant premium on a vehicle that has a wheelchair accessibility over one that does not. Based on our feasibility study, which again had it was a 1 hour maximum time frame for a wait time, and it was an average of 20 to 30 minutes is what the results simulated to be. When we looked at that, and we looked only at the trips that would be generated in Lincoln, and we used data that was based off of our Niagara Specialized Transit study, and we looked at the Transportation Tomorrow survey, which is the provincial government's travel demand study. So we took both existing data and travel demand data, which reports on existing. So we're very confident in the numbers. And for the intra-municipal, so the Lincoln-only trips, you would need 3 to 4 vehicles in order to meet that at the medium demand scenario, which is sort of where we started in general for all of our analysis. For the region to do it on our own and only do intermunicipal trips, we would need 7 to 10 vehicles depending on what demand scenario we landed at. But if we work together, because of the routing efficiencies, we can do the same thing. We can do, for the same number of vehicles, we can do all of the trip types. And that's because now I can pick somebody up on my way from West Lincoln, go up through Grimsby, and drop them all into Beamsville. And you can make those pickups along the way as opposed to doing it ourselves. We can only take people from the city you're in to a different city. And that's problematic for connecting people within your community because that frankly doesn't exist at that point. So again, the connectivity. What I wanted to highlight is being involved in this pilot with the region means that the residents of Lincoln can travel to anywhere in West Niagara. So it doesn't matter where you start, we can take you to that destination, and you can also get that return trip as well. In addition, there would be connections to the intermunicipal transit hubs that exist already in St. Catharines, Welland, and Port Colborne. So it would be the bus terminal in both St. Catharines and Welland, and it would be City Hall in Port Colborne because there's both the regional link bus there as well as the community bus. So not only can we get you wherever you need to go in your own community, in your own side of the region, but we also provide those connections through our existing transit network to get you wherever you may need to go in the eastern portion as well. So there are still some additional considerations that we have, and really this comes down to how many partners do we end up having available with us. So When we start looking at trying to find out what our budget envelope is, it depends on how many partnering municipalities there are, frankly. And that dictates the number of hours in the day that we can operate. So we're hoping for 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's significantly longer, just in context of what's the U-Link is currently operating on. It will also affect the number of vehicles. Since we're paying an hourly rate, again, we'll need to know how many municipalities are in to know what we're going to spend in a year. The estimated fares, as I mentioned, $3 for the local trips, $6 for the intermunicipal trips. You know, that's where we're trending right now. It seems to fit easiest. We did look at some distance-based, but I think that gets very challenging from a rider perspective. You know, and then they start to question, well, you know, this trip is only 1 kilometer further. Why does it cost me double the amount of money? It's just very simply along municipal borders. If you're within your municipality, it's 3. If you go without, it's 6. Easy to keep it straight. The pilot duration. So we're looking at 12 months for our pilot, 1 year, but we're likely looking at including an option to extend for another 12 months. And that's to help us align with any sort of governance review. That, as I mentioned, we're looking at Q1, Q2 of 2020 for a recommendation. So we're really not sure what's going to come out of that, as that study's pretty new. And so we wanted to leave ourselves with flexibility. We didn't want to tie ourselves down, but at the same time, we didn't want to run out at the end of 12 months and then have nowhere to go if we needed, you know, an extra 6 months or an extra year or something. And again, we're targeting a deployment of April 2020, which means that from the region's perspective, once we land the expected budget, which again is really just a continuation of our 2019 budget, we'll be moving forward very quickly. We're looking at finalizing an agreement and beginning to deploy. It takes roughly 12 to 16 weeks to get deployed. And that's extremely fast for an on-demand service. And this company is committed. It's through their partnership with Mercedes that they're able to do that. But it's also that we've been doing a lot of work with them in the background, and we basically know the service parameters that we're looking at. And once we're able to finalize that, we can look at finalizing the agreement. Now we know we have Pelham on board, so we're going to work with them to make sure that everything their council needs, now that they've already approved it, if there's extra information that they need, you know, back and forth, we can certainly give that to them. But they've given us that commitment to move forward. So those things will still, you know, be affected based on when we hear for the remaining municipalities. And just for context, again, we'll be in Grimsby on the 16th of December. So that'll be after budget gets approval, and we'll be asking for them to commit at that time in order to move forward. So, you know, where we are, we've received that approval, we're pending that budget. We're currently trying to establish those partnerships. As far as this evening and Lincoln's participation, we're looking for the endorsement of Public Works Report 3519. We're looking that you would partner with the region on this integrated option so that we can provide both intra and inter-municipal trips to your residents. And then we would begin the process of community engagement, because there's one thing we know is that we will have to get out into each and every one of the communities, teach people how to download the app, teach people how to call in, teach them, you know, basically everything about the service, knowing the different pricing models. We're committed to a very extensive process. And the third and the fourth pieces there are really just about us getting everything up and going. So making sure we have branding on the vehicles, making sure that the community has been engaged and that there's plenty of notices around. And then if we need to optimize the system once it gets launched, we certainly have the option to do so within the pilot period. So I appreciate being given a little bit of latitude with the time here. I know it tends to run a little long, but you know, it's quite important to make sure that we go over all the points. And I tend to be a little bit excited about dealing with this project. That's been a little more than a year that we've been planning for this. So I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Robert, for your presentation. And by the looks of my board, you have lots of questions coming down the pipe here. So before I go to Councillor Russell, I just want to clarify something, because I might have missed it in the notes I made in your presentation. So you certainly articulated that you've identified that West Niagara is made up of 5 municipalities in terms of this expansion: Grimsby, West Lincoln, Lincoln, Pelham, and Waynflete. You articulated that Pelham's on board and that you are going to be in front of the Grimsby Council on December 16th, if I wrote that down correctly. I don't recall you mention anything about Waynfleet or West Lincoln, if you could comment on those municipalities.
So I can certainly, thank you, Chair. We do have a meeting set up with West Lincoln, but to be fair, when we're looking at those two municipalities, they do not have an existing transit levy right now. And the amount, there is no reallocation of transit dollars for them. And the amounts that we're looking for are multiple points on their levy, and based on their senior staff, we've heard that they're likely not to be interested in this. So we are practicing, our due diligence, and we are going out to ensure that that's the case. But the region, again, as I mentioned, we were looking at providing intermunicipal transit to West Niagara. So from our perspective, we want to move forward with some level of service anyway. It's a very drastically reduced level of service for those municipalities. Specifically, we'll say those two right now. We'll sort of assume the other two are going to come on board with us. But with those two, they wouldn't be able to travel anywhere within their municipality. They would only
Fair
be
enough.
able to leave.
No,
And
I
that's really
appreciate
the
those
gap.
comments. I just wanted to clarify before we open it up for committee comments. So, with no further ado, Councilor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenter. I don't want to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce your last name, so presenter you are. A couple things. One, you did kind of touch on, so I'm not going to ask too many questions about it. But again, you thought that the utilization rate would greatly increase over what our current product. So that's good to hear. My question does go along with the contribution. So if we're going to get if we're contributing what our tax levy was set aside with, would Pelham and Grimsby, would their amounts be similar to ours? I'm just trying to figure out how that kind of puzzle for costing comes together and see if, again, based on usage, or is it just based on whatever that levy was, that's what the contribution is. And then going at, again, the second part of that would be, it looks like there's an option for a 12-month or 1 year after that pilot. Would that be at the same fixed cost that we have scheduled on here?
Through you, Chair. So as far as the cost, I'm not 100% sure. Likely, when we went through the negotiation process, we would iron that out, but I would expect that to not change at this point in time. Based on what I've had as far as conversations with the provider, they would be pretty confident in extending out that same price, and so I wouldn't expect the demand to grow so quickly that we would need to make the changes, as in the number of vehicles that we've built into the system, we've built ourselves some growth room. And as far as the contribution amounts, we're essentially asking for the same amounts of money from the varying municipalities. There is a little bit of fluctuation because you don't net exactly the same, but essentially we're asking for those same contributions. Grimsby is a little different because for them it's a whole net new contribution. But again, for some context, this is all net new levy for the region as well. And in fact, it's a separate levy that we're asking for in order to deliver this service. So it's above and beyond our guidance levy. It's a separate, and it would be the first in Ontario to separate levy for transit. So we're excited. We think it's going to happen. We think your numbers are close. If it fluctuates a little bit, it doesn't depend on usage. So we won't be coming back at the end of the year and saying, well, you used 2/3 of the trip, so now we need more money from you. No. We're all partnering together. There's a set pot of money to pay for all the vehicles, and we're just going to do as many trips as we can with that amount of money.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the presenter. I think I like just about everything you've said to me. That being said, I can't find anything wrong with this plan that you've brought before us. That makes me kind of wonder if it's too good to be true, so here I go. All right, so the concerns I have is that this company is a privately held company. It's not publicly traded. Is there a chance or a possibility that this company operates at a loss to get municipalities, the region, everybody on board? Who competes with this company currently that, should things not work out, we dump our transit systems in favor of this? What happens come contract renewal time?
Through you, Chair. So I would say that there's plenty of opportunity to recalibrate. So from my understanding, this company is the lead competitor in this space. So they are, similar to the Uber and Lyfts, but they're partnering with the municipalities in a way that those other ones aren't. And my understanding is that they're not operating at a loss. This covers their margins as well. That being said, as I touched on earlier, we will be reviewing this at the end of that pilot period regardless to see which of these services belong in-house. You know, maybe we want to have these drivers be part of, you know, our existing, you know, retinue. We want to make sure that we are operating the fleet. Maybe we do want to make the capital acquisition purchase. And at that time, as I mentioned, there are a number of different software providers that are out there. There are sort of, you know, a few at the top, and then there are hundreds of budding companies out there. So this is where the transit, the mobility space is going. This isn't a, you know, fly-by-night type of organization. They've got hundreds of deployments. They've been replacing Uber in a number of them where that other model wasn't working. So I appreciate your concern about, you know, what could happen, but based on everything we've heard, we're very confident in moving forward with that.
I asked that question, I thought we had a good deal with the trash pickup, and that somehow didn't work out. So these contracts are fluid. And if I may, how long a partnership are we looking at with this VIA organization? Is it a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year? What's the length of that contract or?
Through you, Chair. So, you know, if there was specific direction to limit it to a certain, you know, duration, we can certainly look at that. Again, our intention was a 1 year pilot with the option to extend up to another 12 months. So a maximum of 2 years. And again, that was really predicated on the ongoing governance review and not knowing, you know, whether or not the region will have to end up, you know, forming a new entity for transit, or, you know, what's going to happen if we'll continue business as usual. And we just didn't want to be locked down in any sort of contract. Very typically with this, any sort of contract that you would bring on a provider, they're going to request 5 years at a minimum in order to do. When we did our specialized transit, they wanted 5 years. They actually wanted 10 years. We got 5 with an option to extend for another 5. This company, I would say, doesn't really want to do the full suite of services. This providing vehicles and drivers and call center is much like Tesla building its own supercharger network. Right? It knows it needs that foot in the door in order to prove itself. And when a big barrier is, not only do you have to pay these operating dollars, but now you have to buy a fleet on top of it and hire a bunch of drivers that, A, you may have to lay off, or B, they end up in some form of a union and then you have to, you know, recycle them around. And if it doesn't work, what do you do with all those vehicles? And so these were challenges that they've seen all along the way from their other deployments. And that's where they've stepped in to sort of fill that gap and say, okay, you know, we have a partnership with Mercedes. We can go ahead and, you know, they're not making money on those elements. So I know you mentioned about, you know, undercutting. They're basically just paying off those vehicles at that rate. And then the money that they make is basically off their software. So it'd be the same thing if once we get completed the pilot, we decide that some of those services should be brought in-house, we could take those steps and use their software. And if we wanted to continue on using them because everything was going smoothly and why rock the boat, then they're open to that option as well.
Okay,
Councillor Michalak, anything else?
that's good. Thank you.
Councillor Michalak, you never disappoint. You always ask the question that everybody wants to ask but is afraid to ask. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei, through to the presenter. Thank you very much for tonight. So my question is back to the players. You know, we're looking at 5 municipalities partnering. So far, we've got a yes from Pelham because they have intermunicipal transit and they understand how it works. We have ULink, which has been very successful in our community. If there's only 2 of us coming to the table, how is that financially going to work out? And if more join down the road, is that the numbers going to be reconfigured? I'm trying to get my head around the cost.
Chair, so I would say that we can still make it work with 2. Based on the demand that we've seen, you know, the 3 major players for demand was Lincoln, Pelham, and Grimsby. So if one of those was to opt out, you know, we would still be able to provide the service. Just those that opted out would receive that significantly lower level of service where you're not actually able to facilitate trips within your own municipality, right? So if you opted out, for example, nobody can go from Vineland to Jordan. And it would be the same thing if, for anybody in Grimsby, or once GO stations are, up and running, we wouldn't be able to take you to your nearest GO station. We would have to take you to a neighboring GO station, which, it doesn't make a lot of sense from an operational perspective.
I totally understand that, how
Yeah.
it would work, but I guess what I'm trying to get at, if there's 5 municipalities paying
Yep.
and only 2 are coming in to pay, are the 2 carrying the entire amount? Like, how do we figure out I guess that's where I'm
Through you, Chair, no.
trying to figure out how expensive this is gonna be, so.
So the expense is the amount of your existing levy
Okay.
reallocated. That's a
Okay.
hard stop at that number.
Okay, that's
The
where I wanna
region
go.
is introducing a separate levy in order to bring significant dollar amounts. It's in the range of 2 million that the region is looking to bring to this program over the length of the period. So
Okay, I guess that's what I was looking
so
for. I just
we're there to
wanted be sure.
offset sort of
Okay.
that difference, but what we need is your contribution so that we can justify those local options and, make sure that there is enough vehicles sort of within that area as well to make sure that that happens for you.
Thank
But
you
the
for
number's
that.
a hard stop.
I do have, Chair Bernay, another question. I just want to talk about specialized transit. It's fabulous, like, if it's in our community, it's much needed, but cost. Are we looking at $3 intra, $6 if they leave our community? Is it the same for specialized transit?
So through you, Chair, with specialized transit, this is where the jurisdictional quagmire comes in. And with Niagara Specialized Transit, we are not able to take somebody within your community to somewhere else within your community. So the way our specialized works is you can only leave, and then we can bring you back. That's it. So
Okay.
the reason why this will be so much better than that is because we won't need a specialized transit
Yes.
system on top of it. People won't need to apply. It'll just be one system, $3 locally, $6.
Same cost?
Same cost, yeah, absolutely. We intend on having a wheelchair accessible fleet that's more than adequate to meet the demand of the typical needs of that community.
Okay, very good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mr. Selowitz. Is that close enough?
I appreciate the effort.
All right. So pilot, help me a little bit with pilot, and, you've explained a little bit through the questions on what you're trying to establish, and it sounds like you're trying to establish what the role of the region will be, and will the region be a bigger player in the actual operation of the vehicles and of the call center? And because I get a little bit nervous in that, we've got a committed transit system. Granted, not ideal, not certainly what is being proposed here, but there is some usage on that system, and there is some government funding that's coming through on that system. And from a pilot standpoint, I get concerned that after 12 months or after 24 months, you know what, this isn't working, so we're gonna pack it up. So can you help me with that pilot word and what you're going to be doing after 12 months or after 24 months?
Sure can, through you, Chair. So I would say the word pilot is mostly a reflection of our desire to not lock into one specific company. And when we were trying to get some support from our own council, going to a new model with one company that we're effectively sole sourcing it to one company, based on them being the only one in the industry that can provide exactly what we need. And that's really where the pilot sort of language comes in, is we fully expect this to work. Again, this is new to Niagara. This is not new globally. This is the new paradigm. There's over 1 billion ride-hailing trips worldwide now, in a world where transit ridership is decreasing. So something has to change, and this is what has been changing. So whether we continue on with VIA as the provider, or look to transition to another one, or bring those services in-house to the region based on, some governance review that is coming, we fully expect to be providing services to the residents of West Niagara. It's been documented since our 2017 Dillon report that there was needs of the communities out here that hadn't been met. And then again, in our implementation plan from 2018, again identified the needs of these communities. So from that perspective, I don't want the word pilot to sort of scare you off and say, well, they're just coming in and then they're gonna cut and run. The region understands that there is unmet need in all of the municipalities in West Niagara. We're looking at providing the best option. This is what we think it is right now. Can I guarantee you that this is absolutely the best option? No. Am I this close to guaranteeing you that it's hands down better than what the option that we have right now, which would be running fixed buses out from the varying municipalities? Yes.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. So help me a little bit on the comment about Innisfil and as I understand that situation, you know, they introduced Uber and they introduced a funding model that was a subsidy to the Uber transaction. So over time, that became more popular and more popular and more popular. So help me understand that the popularity of this program doesn't expand the way that program ran, and now we've got 10 vehicles, 12 vehicles, 20 vehicles, and we have a request for more money and more budget. So help me with that relationship between, it failed in Innisfil because, you know, they put a budget together and now they can't afford it, and what could be a very popular program if we got all communities engaged, and where the funding goes.
Through you, Chair. So I guess the most straightforward answer is eventually, if the service was popular enough, there would be a discussion amongst the partners about, are we providing enough service to the community? The same discussion we have on our specialized transit side when we went from 12,000 rides through the year in 1 year to 30,000. The difference is, in that example and in the Innisfil example, we just had to absorb that in the budget. Otherwise, the service would go away, and a very vulnerable sector of the population would be left with nothing. And in Innisfil's, everybody would just be left with nothing. So the way that we've built our profile or our feasibility study is the number of vehicles that we are saying we need right now allows for a substantial growth. Substantial growth. We've looked at those other models, and we fully believe we can accommodate that growth within the system. But again, even if we get to the point where now the vehicles are full, you know, there's 6+ people in a vehicle for every single trip, there's other tweaks that we can make. Because we're on an hourly operating model, it's not that per trip subsidy that causes, you know, the proportional increase in costs. Ours is set, and so we can change other parameters like the average wait time, or we can change, maybe we need, if it's that busy, perfectly frankly, we are going to need a fixed bus somewhere if it gets that busy. And the region would likely be looking at, it would very likely be an intermunicipal trip, I would imagine, if there was that much, possibly going to the GO stations once the hourly trains are running. So this isn't a set it and forget it type of thing. It needs to be monitored constantly, and we need to make sure that we're making changes that fit the program. We don't expect that the demand would change within that pilot period. Even we included GO station trips in our assessment, even to start with, even though those trains aren't there and the bus traffic is, you know, it's limited compared to what they would think the train traffic would be. So we're preparing for that. And again, it leaves us options within the system to make changes so that we don't leave even our own council in a position where we say, you know, this great thing we did out here, well, as of September 1st, we've got to shut it down because we don't have the money unless you give us more. You know, I had to stand in front of my council doing that once, and that is not something I ever want to do again. So this is why we're following this model instead.
And thank you. And I just had a comment that I share the concern of the other councilors with the potential of a Grimsby no in this because we've got, you know, the biggest center in Western Niagara is Grimsby. You know, they do provide 30,000 plus, you know, residents to the program. So you know, I just be very concerned where they're going today. They don't have a levy. for intermunicipal busing. So they haven't got that. So I just have a reservation that, and I wish you well on December 12th, but I have a reservation that answer may not be what we're hoping it will be.
Speak to that really quickly, Chair? Is it all
Quickly.
right? Thank you. So the only thing I would say to that is it almost doesn't matter if Grimsby's in from Lincoln's perspective. The same way from Pelham's perspective, it doesn't matter if any of the other municipalities come on board, because the increased level of service that you get allows you to facilitate the trips within your municipality. So quick example, if you're in, your residents can go anywhere within your municipality and anywhere without. That includes Grimsby, whether they're in or whether they're out. What happens is those residents in Grimsby don't get the same benefit that your residents do of being able to go anywhere within their own city. Your residents can still go to Grimsby anywhere, and then anywhere to Waynfleet, and then anywhere back here. So from that perspective, there's no issue with whether they're in or not. The region and the number of vehicles that we need in the partnership is basically done on an individual basis with each municipality. So if you're in, and that's great. And if Grimsby's out, that's unfortunately really too bad for Grimsby, and we'll wish them well, but we still want to provide a basic level of service to those communities.
That's
Thank you
good
for
to know.
obliging me.
That's really good to know that you're looking at this as individual Lincoln, West Lincoln, Pelham, individual fixed charges, if I can use that word, for each municipality.
The price, sorry, if I wasn't clear earlier, the price doesn't change for you if only 2 municipalities are in versus 3. Your contribution is your reallocation of your transit dollars, full stop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Patriva.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. Thank you very much, Mr. Salowich. Appreciate your presentation, the enthusiasm. You know what? This takes me back to about 5 years ago when a bunch of us attended a session in Grimsby to look at municipal transit. They had a presenter there from Bradford, West Gwillimbury, and talked about how they were doing it, and we took that leap of faith. And I think tonight's a night where we need to do that again. You've laid out a lot of the benefits of this. Councillor Michalak came out with one of his profound statements the other night. I'm going to tweak it a little bit. Proposal's a winner. If getting off the fixed route and servicing more people is the ultimate goal, and I think it is. I mean, I can see this, and then we're serving our municipality as a whole. And you're moving away. If you want to go from Beamsville to Rockaway, you can do it. And back. And I know when you were here in October, I was, because I can blue sky with the best of them. So I asked point blank, and hopefully maybe you know now, is there going to be a depot per se in West Niagara within the municipalities as a touch point to service?
Through you, Chair. So we're still trying to work out, again, based on who's involved.
Okay.
And what I would say is it's sort of split up into 2 things. In the evening, once the service is done for the day, yes, we would need to find a location where those vehicles can rest, and we would like to have some sort of, spread throughout the community to cut down on some of those deadhead hours. But when the service is active, the vehicles will be traveling based on the aggregate demand for trips. And so there's really not a lot of time for just sitting around. And because your community would be assuming, of course, that your community would be involved, there would always be vehicles in the near future, in the area. And even if there wasn't, there can always be one, because the software limits it within the time frame set out, which is what we set as maximum of 1 hour.
Okay.
So,
Okay, I just see it as, if we're a positive trip generator,
yes.
that we could cut down that time if there was, something here to start with, right? And then as a hub and spoke model where it feeds out from it, so.
And that would just happen naturally over
Yeah.
the course of the program. We would see where those morning trips are, sort of thing, and they would end in those areas, which is sort of why we would need a few places to be able to have those vehicles stationed
Okay.
overnight.
And in rudimentary terms, it's almost like a Niagara Airbus. So I'm going at 7, Councilor Russell's going at 7. You're going to pick us both up at 7:10, and we're going to get to the same endpoint. So, I mean, lots of positives to it. And again, I'm gonna take it a step further because I'm that blue sky person. 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Any opportunities, and I know it's in its infancy, but I like to go there. Special events, New Year's Eve, extend it to 1 a.m. Based on the you know, I can see this being, you know, going at breakneck speed because of you can go anywhere. So just if you've thought that far out, I'm sure you have, but I always like to take that leap.
Through you, Chair. So the answer simply is yes, there's always opportunity for those elements. You know, the same way that we do New Year's Eve, we run extended hours on the Niagara Region Transit side of things. So all of those things could be considered, and if during the planning process, we know about them in advance, we can help get the word out and make those things align. The same thing and same discussion would need to happen once the daily GO trains were to start more regularly. You know, are we starting early enough to feed people to those trains? So again, it's a dynamic system. Things would change based on those needs, and we have some contingency in order to make sure that we can accommodate for those things.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mary Easton.
Well, I don't know how I can follow these counselors, but it is a very exciting proposition that you brought forward to us, and we have been talking about it, on-demand service, and it just seems as though, you know, I mean, it is it's a big step, not because it's a risk. It's a big step just because we didn't think that we would be taking it right now. But I have to say that what's really appealing to me is the fact that this model gets us into the rural areas immediately, and there's equity across the community. That's extremely important, and it's one that I think is extremely important to our community. And to go along much longer without that availability doesn't seem to be, it's not right, but it also could have been very expensive. I'm happy about the specialized transit because I certainly remember those discussions. They were quite painful, and we would not want to go there again. So that equity model, this equity model is really important. It is comforting to know that our decision does not hinge on Grimsby or West Lincoln. If they are not ready, they are not ready. We don't care to be pushed by other people. We all have our reasons for doing what we do. And so it's good to know that we're not encumbered by any circumstances in regard to that. In fact, I feel very strongly that the province's ideal shared service model only works when all parties are ready to move at the same time. Otherwise, I think it becomes risky for those that aren't ready, and it becomes a real inconvenience for those who want to move forward. And that's where I feel we may be in this situation. I don't remember you talking about employment. So I think I've got a pretty good idea where these, all about the vehicles, but is this a local job opportunity? How does that play out? I mean, I've used Uber, and you know, I'm just curious to know whether these are really local jobs that we're talking about.
Through you, Chair. So the drivers would be hired locally. So I mean, as number of vehicles that we had, the call center would likely not be local during that pilot period. They'd likely just expand one of their existing pieces already. So, you know, I wouldn't consider it a significant job generator at this point, but you know, this is more of a community service, I would say, than an employment generator.
Right. Well, I guess according to Councillor Pacharita, the depot would also be an interesting piece of the transaction, so we know you're talking about that. So just to be clear, we have gas tax that we had already spoke about sharing that. And once it's in, I understand, once we've committed it to the pilot, that it's in there for the duration. It's not something that changes.
That's correct, through you, Chair, that's correct. So it
Okay.
would essentially be your net transit levy that you have currently, plus, and then the gas tax would flow to the region, the same as the revenue. And that would
Okay.
try and offset some of our, let's say disproportionate allocation of resources to the program.
Right. And if we look at the pilot as being a pilot of a company as opposed to a pilot of a system, then I see that makes very good sense, because if the company is not meeting all the needs, then your plan is to,
Through you, Chair, to evaluate the opportunities for bringing those items in-house and determine what what was it that wasn't working? Was it their customer service? Maybe that needs to come in-house. Was it the software? That's a bigger issue. We don't foresee that to actually be the issue. But in all likelihood, if you look at how the other transit systems operate in Niagara, for their specialized transit, they do most of that in-house as it is. So in all likelihood, the long-term goal is to move as much of this as possible in-house, and only, do what we can't do. And what we can't do is develop an app in order to route trips efficiently. And so
Okay.
it's just this is considered a stepping stone to getting us there, but I do like the way that you referenced that this is more of a pilot of the company than of the process or of a program itself. We're committed to West Niagara and providing intermunicipal transit the same way that you're committed to providing local transit service to your residents. So just doing that together, this is that opportunity to do that.
right. But the way you describe it and the way it's structured, you can certainly see that an evaluation of where our system is going and what even a great deal of money could offer us in terms of a fulsome service. It doesn't take a lot of brain power to figure out. It is very limited. And just like Innisfil is growing like crazy, we would be quite limited unless we made a significant investment. So I don't know where we're going to go with this. I had asked the CAO earlier about even developing an algorithm so that we could have another crack at it just by following where a person would be going and where the money would be applied. I don't know now whether we really need that. We'll decide that in a few minutes, I guess, when we vote. But Mr. Salowich, I think you did a great job describing it. And I feel really confident as a regional councillor that this is a good route for us to take, and it's going to move us along much faster than we would otherwise be able to do.
Thank you, I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Russell, I believe you started off. One question. What do you have? One.
One question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the presenter. One of the comments made me think of a logistical question, so forgive me if this is not correct. If, for instance, Grimsby opted out, they would still be eligible for intermunicipal transit between two municipalities, but they would not have access to the transit within their own municipality. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
So if one of our residents, say from Tintern, booked a trip to go to the Y, and then also wanted to book a trip from the Y, which is in Grimsby, to go to Canadian Tire, would that person have to go back to Lincoln and then to Canadian Tire in Grimsby?
Through you, Chair. So that would be one of the limitations is in your municipality, in the municipality that is contributing to local transit, those local trips are permitted. In any municipality that did not participate, they would not be permitted to do those local. So it would be very awkward, yes, if your resident went to Grimsby and then wanted to go somewhere else in Grimsby as one trip. It would be very awkward indeed in those circumstances, which is why we're thinking positively and thinking that Grimsby will come on board based on their council's strategic priority. But yes, it's the same reason why we got onto this integrated model to begin with. Because if we just did it on our own, that issue would be everywhere for every trip. So it's why we're here in the first place.
It is a great question, though. That becomes problematic for our residents, so appreciate your candid and upfront, honest answer. Councillor Pachariva.
Just one, Chair Brunei. Any cost to download the app? Thank you.
So, Mr. Salowich, thank you very much for your presentation. Mr. Robinson, for being here this evening. I think most of our questions have been answered. I think we came here with a lot of unanswered questions. I think we're leaving here this evening with most of them answered. I do have to admit that I was hoping your response was going to be a little bit different on the gas tax funding. You know, currently, we're levying $175,000 to our residents with the use of gas tax. God forbid, I think we're all embracing this on-demand system and think it's the way, it's the future. But if for some reason unbeknown, this thing doesn't go off, and our residents are telling us 2 years from now, I was hoping that in the word of pilot project that our gas tax funding would come back to the town of Lincoln, but I'm hearing that that's not the case.
And so, to you, Chair, I'm not sure if I maybe misrepresented the question or misunderstood. So if we got to a point where at the end of a pilot period and, everybody decided this wasn't working for their respective parties, and we went back to doing our intermunicipal trips and you went back to doing whatever service you wanted locally, yes, I'm sorry, your gas tax would go back to the town at that point in time. The gas tax really only comes to the region to offset that portion that we're committing during the pilot period. So your net levy stays the same. Rather than, your actual costs for transit, would you factor in paying your company and your staff and all of that, is somewhere north of 280?
289.
289, thank you. So that gas tax is only offsetting that. We're just assuming that offset, that we'll receive that same amount anyway, and you're just paying the net. So we're just sort of cutting out the process of, okay, give us 288 and then we'll give you the gas tax back. Just in the interim, it's just easier to ask you for the difference and keep the gas tax. And it's a lot easier to not pass it back and forth. And that's really the difference. That gas tax is yours if you're the one providing separate local transit.
Okay. And just one other question. I mean, we've heard through the presentation, these are Mercedes vans. Currently, the U-Link bus that we're using accommodates wheelchairs and bicycles. Can you comment on the availability to handle bikes, how many, and wheelchairs, how many?
To you, Chair. So wheelchairs, it can certainly accommodate them. It would likely be a single vehicle or a single unit per vehicle. But again, based on the percentage of wheelchair trips that is done, Niagara-wide, it's extremely low. It's somewhere in the 3% of our transit trips. So, when we're looking at having wheelchair accessible vehicles, in excess of, say, half the fleet, we really don't expect there to ever be a situation where you have multiples. And even with that, the software limitations is still able to program to make sure that next person can get a ride during that time. As far as bikes, we haven't gone down that path yet with them. All of the other transit vehicles in Niagara have bike racks, so it's something that I need to still broach with VIA. But again, we haven't even gotten to that specific of discussion yet.
Okay. I appreciate that. I can tell you, we launched active transportation in 2017. We had a member on our active transportation that was in a wheelchair. She didn't have any mobility freedom for many, many years, and she rode that U-Link almost every day. So it is important to Lincoln. So I appreciate your comments.
Absolutely.
Appreciate the presentation. So seeing no other comments, no other discussion, we have a motion to receive and file the presentation from Robert Salowich, Program Manager for Transportation Services, Niagara Region, regarding on-demand transit, and I will require a mover for the motion. Councillor McPherson, all in favor? And that is carried. We're now moving to the regular agenda, where we are now considering item 8.1, PW 35-19, West Niagara on-demand transit. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Reimer.
Just clarification, thank you, Chair Brunei. Just clarification on the wording of here. We're endorsing a partnership and our CAO to formalize with the region only, not with any other municipalities.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, that is correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't really have any questions in particular, more or less comments to what we're discussing, and that's, we have to ask ourselves what we currently have, what we're currently able to offer, and what is being proposed. And I like the hours of operation. I've heard from people that are using the U-Link, they're able to use it to get to work, but then they can't get home because it doesn't run late enough. Not everyone can drive, not everyone's able to drive, and I think that this model suits the needs of a rural community, and regardless of whether or not you can get to the Y or back, or from the Y to Canadian Tire, you can't do that with the current system we have anyway. So I think if we can, for the same money, get an enhanced service, I'm liking what I'm hearing, and as long as we're not being sold a false bill of goods, I mean, but, you know, that's, I'm liking, so, thank you very much.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yeah, through you, Chair Brunei, when we raise the question, I'd like to ask for a recorded vote.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. So I'm going to, I actually have, I'm going to be honest and open and transparent here. I have two motions. So before I read any motion, I'm going to ask if there's anyone on council that thinks, before we read a motion, that we need any more information. We need to pause, get any other information, wait for adjoining municipalities. I just want some feedback before we go to a motion. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, the two things that, you know, concern me coming in tonight have both been addressed in the independence of the municipalities and not having to concern ourselves with other municipalities and their funding in the program. It's completely independent to each municipality. So that was one of the issues that I had, that if Grimsby wasn't in, does that mean another, you know, 200 grand for us, or, you know, whatever that number would be. The other was the gas tax, and the loss of the gas tax was a concern, and that also was very good news, that, you know, if this program didn't work, you know, 2 years down the road and we came back with U-Link, we'd have that gas tax coming back. So I'm comfortable with a vote on this tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. I'm going to echo exactly what Councillor McPherson just said. I was concerned about the partnership, the cost, and that obviously we are independent, so we don't need to worry about what the other municipalities are doing. And I also had concerns about the gas tax dollars, what would happen, and that was just answered here now. So that kind of takes that away as well for me. That's not a concern, so.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Pachariva.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Brunei. And like the other two councillors, I had, you know, there was unknowns. You know, looking at the document, Mr. Salowich did a bang-up job answering all of our questions, putting us at ease. If he can do this at Grimsby, I don't see why not. They're not on board that night on the 16th. They'd be foolish not to be. So I think it's the best scenario for our municipality.
Thank you, Councillor. So, we have a motion to receive and file report PW 35-19 West Niagara On-Demand Transit. To endorse the partnership with Niagara Region and other interested municipalities for deployment of the West Niagara On-Demand Transit pilot service outlined in the report. To authorize staff, our CAO, to formalize the partnership with the Region of Niagara and report back to Council with an update once final service parameters have been set, and to approve the current financial allocation already in the Town of Lincoln Transit budget, $175,000 annualized, to the Regional Municipality of Niagara as contribution to the West Niagara on-demand transit pilot service as outlined in the below financial considerations of the report. I believe we were requested to have a record vote, so I will start. We always have a legislative component, so we need a two-thirds vote to waive the rules. So can I see a show of hands for approval to go to a recorded vote? And that is carried. So I will start on my far left. Councillor Reimer, yay or no? Yay or nay? Councillor Reimer.
Yay.
Councillor Timmers.
Yay.
Councillor Michalak.
Yay.
Councillor McPherson.
Hit me. Pat Shreve, get out. Yay.
Councillor Pachariva.
Until he turns off. Yay.
Councillor Russell.
Yay.
Mayor Easton.
Yay.
And that is carried. So we are now considering item 8.2 LS-16-19, the Age-Friendly Citizen Advisory Committee Report, Committee 2019 Annual Report. It's great to see so many members of this committee here this evening to show their support. And I would like to now call on Charlotte Sheridan, the chair of the committee, and staff who will provide a presentation. Please come forward.
On behalf of our committee, thank you, Mayor Easton and Council, for this opportunity to report on the Town of Lincoln Age-Friendly Advisory Committee. The AFAC is a new committee established in May of this year. The purpose of the committee is to advise Council on matters related to the achievement of an age-friendly municipality while developing and implementing an age-friendly strategy for the Town of Lincoln. An age-friendly community enables people of all ages to actively participate in community activities and treats everyone with respect regardless of their age. The committee has 8 citizens, 2 councilors, and 2 Town of Lincoln staff. The members bring a vast array of knowledge, expertise, skills, and experience, as well as a passion to help make our community a place to belong for all ages. We are parents, grandparents, professionals, retired professionals, seniors, and younger citizens, and we all get along very well. During the short time we have been together as a committee, we have developed a vision, mission, and value statement. Our vision, making our community a place to belong for all ages. Our mission, to create a vibrant, healthy, and diverse community where quality of life, inclusivity, and aging well is supported through all the stages of life. Our values, we believe that everyone has an equal voice and is treated with dignity and respect. We believe all ages are important contributing members of our community. We have also developed both short and long-term goals, having already achieved several of our short-term goals. One of our goals is to develop collaborative relationships with our stakeholders in Niagara. One important stakeholder is the Age-Friendly Niagara Network. Please refer to the handout in your agenda prepared by Niagara Connects, page 53 and 54. The AFNN is a group of local citizens, volunteers, partners, and municipal leaders who have joined together to learn about, take action on, and champion age-friendly community principles to make Niagara a community for all ages. Since 2008, the network has engaged hundreds of people in the Niagara-wide community to develop and implement the Niagara Age Strategy and Action Plan. As chair of Lincoln's Age-Friendly Committee, I am actively involved with the network's 3 action groups: community engagement and communication, recreation, learning, and leisure, improved services, systems, and infrastructure. My participation with the network and other municipal age-friendly advisory committees is extremely valuable in order to share resources and best practices, work together to strengthen our agendas, develop partnerships, and heighten awareness of what an age-friendly community means. The scope of the Town of Lincoln Age-Friendly Committee is based on the World Health Organization's pillars of age-friendly communities. These pillars include outdoor spaces and buildings, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation, communication and information, and community health and support services. In order to direct our work plan and establish realistic goals, we have developed a survey to gather input from the community on what quality of life is like in Lincoln. The survey was launched on November the 18th through the Town of Lincoln website, social media, newspaper ads, and in-person distribution. And we heard today that we now have 240 responses, and we're very excited about that. And the input from the community will direct our committee's focus for the next 3 years. To further promote our committee, we are developing rack cards, a banner, and business cards. During the September Niagara-wide meeting of chairs and co-chairs of local municipal seniors and age-friendly advisory committees, participants identified the opportunity to work together to host a Niagara-wide forum. This event would bring in a dynamic, high-caliber speaker to address a topic that affects a broad range of people. For example, promotion of healthy aging and the importance of physical activity for people of all ages. This is planned for spring of 2020. Our committee will also support the Town of Lincoln Senior Showcase that is planned for June of next year. Our long-term goal is to work towards the World Health Organization age-friendly designation and have the Town of Lincoln join the ranks of this global network for age-friendly citizens and communities. We will also work towards an age-friendly business designation and youth-friendly designation. Our committee is excited to review the survey results and look forward to working hard to make Lincoln age-friendly for the next 3 years. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Charlotte, for that presentation. Very professional. You and your committee have been very busy.
Yes, we have.
And I kind of get the impression you've done these presentations before. Very, very professional. Very well done.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from council? Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brune. I don't have any questions as I sit on that committee. I just had a couple of comments. Thank you very much, Charlotte, and to all our committee, our age-friendly committee members that are here tonight. I am very excited and happy to be part of this committee. And the work that we've accomplished so far in this first year is just incredible. And I just have to say the members are really, obviously very involved, and I'm really pleased to see where we're going with this and our vision statement and values, excellent. So I also want to just give a little shout out to Lori Laird and to Rebecca Mackay for their help and their staff support, helping us getting everything together and working through a lot. We really brainstormed many hours in the Beamsville room, and I'm just really proud of where we're going, so. We certainly do, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor McCulloch.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you to the presenter. I liked what you just said at the end there with regards to the youth-friendly designation. I think when you think of this committee, you're thinking that it's geared more towards the adult senior type. But I like the fact that you guys are working with all ages. And just, could you give me an idea, how do you have any youth that sit on your committee? How do you engage with the youth? How do you make a business or an area, any thoughts, or are you gonna be working on that to make an area or a business youth-friendly?
Through you, Chair. We do struggle with the fact that we do want an all-inclusive community. But what we're really excited about, I think, is the survey results, because our survey, it's age 13. So, and the survey will be completed by youth. So I think that will dictate where we go and how we include the youth. As far as a youth designation, through you, Chair, I'd like to ask Lori to respond to that, the youth designation.
Thank you, Charlotte. And
Sorry about that, Lori, I didn't.
Oh, that's fine. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor McCulloch. The youth-friendly designation is actually through Playworks, which is a collaboration of a number of organizations, 4-H, Parks and Recreation Ontario, Boys and Girls Club, and they have 10 criteria that we would look to see how we fit within those criteria and hopefully be designated through Playworks. So I think when we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of completing the criteria, that will really pinpoint maybe where we are lacking in our engagement with youth, if we are, in fact, lacking. So that will give us a little bit more direction of involving the youth. Some of our members of the committee are certainly very involved with local schools and ensuring we get input from the students. We do have a number of the survey results were from the youth, so we certainly want to engage the youth. As Charlotte says, it's a wide age span that we're working with, but and we do have to get away from the thought that age-friendly is about seniors, because that's not where we want. So I think us looking at, and I'm maybe going off on a tangent, looking at the age-friendly designation as well, the youth-friendly designation, will get a nice overview of all ages and what the committee can bring towards the community to make sure we're all being able to age, because we all are aging.
And if I may, I like it because I think we have a lot of good kids in the community. I think that, we label some as, being bad, and then, next thing you know, you see a sign at the Avondale store that says, no more than 3 kids at a time. That, I want to get away from that if we can and put a little more trust in our youth, or a little more pride in being a youth and not being labeled as, possible troublemakers. So I appreciate what you guys are up to, so that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And the other councillor member on the age-friendly, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to add to Councillor Timmer's comments. Said it very well. Congratulations, Charlotte, you nailed it. Beautiful, beautiful job. I did want to recognize those other committee members that are here tonight. Ann Charche is here, Juan Miranda beside Ann. We have Taylor Graham, who's here tonight. And we have our Vice Chair, Cheryl Venditti, who's here. So we're only missing about 2 or 3 from the committee. So fantastic for you folks to come out and support Charlotte. And the presentation tonight shows a commitment that we know we have on that committee. I mean, it is a very diverse committee, lots of different backgrounds and lots of different angles people are coming at, but it does work well, and Charlotte's done a great job of chairing in the first year and pulling all the things together that we've done so far, so congratulations.
Thank you, Councillor. Mary Stin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Charlotte. It's very nice to meet you and the rest of the committee this evening. And I must compliment you on the success that you've had to date. And there are good role models within the region as well. And it certainly appears to me as though you're ready to engage with them. I want to draw to your attention through you, Mr. Chairman, about a regional committee around community safety and well-being, which has been it's been mandated by the province. And some of the areas in the World Health Organization model are being considered on a region-wide basis, and we can connect you with, it's done through community services at the region. I think it would be very advantageous for the voices of this community to be heard possibly through the committee as well as the questionnaire. Also, Trinity United Church had a questionnaire that was carried out over the summer. Again, a number of the items in this model, particularly around housing and transportation, outdoor spaces, community support, I think a good number of these were included. We have the connections there, and we can certainly get a copy of the report. Again, all in an effort not to duplicate and also to strengthen the work that you're doing. So it would give you a broader perspective. But you've made a great start. I'm very pleased that you've come tonight to give us a progress report, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. So we have a motion to receive and file the Age-Friendly Citizen Advisory Committee 2019 Annual Report. And we will require a mover for the motion, Councillor Timmers. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. We are now considering item 8.3, LS-17-19, the Active Transportation Citizen Advisory Committee 2019 Annual Report. And Mr. Andrew Bowles, the chair, and Mike McRonald, the vice chair of the committee, will be providing a presentation. No pressure following that age-friendly. And before Mr. Bowles and Mr. McRonald, I also wanted to acknowledge Mr. Tom Clark, who's also a member of the Active Transportation Committee, for being with us this evening. Gentlemen.
Through you, Chair, on behalf of the committee, Andrew and myself would like to thank council and staff, and especially the members of the community have taken their time come here tonight. The scope of the Active Transportation Committee will advise council on matters related to safe roads, active transportation, and sustainable trails development, while monitoring the implementation of the Transportation Master Plan, and encouraging, promoting, and participating in the planning of supportive policies, programs, and facilities. The committee members we have were built from all areas of Lincoln. Given the one Lincoln feel, we have 9 committee members, 2 being chair and vice chair, which are presented tonight. We also have Carol Phillips, Justin Zegers, Ken Mann, Larry Shettle, Nick Halkis, Tom Clark, Tom Wiley. We also have 2 counselors, Adam Russell and J.D. Pachaveria, and 2 staff members, Sarah Ain and Rebecca McKay. As a committee, we have, sorry, bear with me. We've we've had laid out committee priorities. To serve as a liaison between the community and the town on matters pertaining to active transportation. To monitor the implementation of active transportation components of the Transportation Master Plan, parks, recreation, cultural master plan, and to take action to influence where necessary. Provide advice to staff in the development of transportation plans, policies, to advise on the development, delivery, and maintenance of all active transportation policies, programs, and facilities. To educate residents and businesses regarding the environmental, social, economic, and health benefits of active transportation. To promote, support, and increase active transportation as a more routine component of the work, school commute, shopping, socializing, and entertainment endeavors. To encourage citizens to use forms of active transportation through public outreach, education programs, and events, example, monthly walks, etc. To educate the public on benefits of the necessities of safety aspects of the transportation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Through you, Chair, and further to my colleagues' comments this evening. In 2017, the predecessor of our committee, it was an ad hoc committee, put together an application for the provincial Share the Road Foundation Bike Friendly Community Award. And we were pleased to have received an honorable mention. But we wanted to, this iteration of the committee wanted to take that a step further and figure out where we can go. So that is one of the priorities that we've identified as part of what Michael was saying, part of the whole idea of promoting active transportation, promoting education in the active transportation space. So some of the comments that were received from 2017 that we're trying to build upon indeed include the launch of a bike-friendly month area with social and family-friendly rides. As we launch the Transportation Master Plan, as it moves forward, we want to make sure that we were providing staff with the input necessary to ensure active transportation programs and ideas are kept front of mind. We also want to make sure that we touch upon the 5 E's of the program: engineering, encouragement, education, enforcement, and evaluation and planning. So that has to do with the engineering of roadways, education of both road users like pedestrians and drivers, evaluation and planning of how these different bikeways are going to be developed, et cetera. Another area that we're looking at is safe school travel planning and active safe routes programs for schools. Taking into consideration that we don't want kids all the time being driven to school. We want them to be able to enjoy their community, and that involves walking with their parents to school, cycling to school with their parents. And we want to make sure that is a safe experience for them. And we want to make sure that we create an active transportation evaluation plan to track information about the number of people that are cycling in our community, the reasons that they are riding in our community, and the barriers that might exist to cycling in our community. And I recall the conversation earlier this evening. We were talking about the development of cycling infrastructure along Green Lane. So that's certainly it's great to see that that's being taken into consideration. And indeed, we want to expand public awareness campaigns by utilizing existing resources that the town has access to, such as the exposure that the Share the Road Bike-Friendly Community Award brings to an organization such as ours. So, in terms of our next steps as a committee, we do have a pretty bold agenda, as you can see from what Michael was saying. But we want to be able to evaluate, provide some feedback, and consult with staff members and ensure that the active transportation lens is brought to bear when developing these plans, such as the transportation master plan, the parks master plan, and determining how best to ensure that active transportation is taken into consideration when we are constructing new and improved areas for infrastructure, such as along Green Lane, and where we're seeing some of the new development around the town. We want to reapply for the Bike-Friendly Community Award Program. We feel that we have made some significant strides, and we are excited to throw our hat back into the ring for that. We indeed are having our bike-friendly event on June 13th, 2020, at the Fleming Center, and that's an important thing for us to show that Lincoln is indeed a community where we take active transportation quite seriously. We are promoting the utilization of safety materials through our social media networks and avenues, and through our walk to school programs that we have out there as well. So we are trying our best to engage our community, ensure that our community has the infrastructure and the public awareness tools, the public education tools that are required to ensure that people are safe when they're able to walk our communities, walk to school, walk to work, enjoy our downtowns, and enjoy cycling when the weather permits. So with that, thank you very much for your time. Thanks to staff for their assistance, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Before I open it up for questions, which I see we do have a number, I acknowledge Mr. Clark. I also want to pay attention to Mr. Ken Mann, who's also part of the active transportation, who is with us this evening. Welcome, Ken. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the chair and vice chair of our committee. A couple things I wanted to mention. Thank you for the presentation. I think it was a great job from both of you. One thing that, again, wasn't really touched on, it's really kind of hard to bring into it, but again, you heard the age-friendly talk about how well they've meshed and how well they get together. I think, again, we have that similar situation with AT. I also think that we have such a broad variety of backgrounds and experiences that are brought together, which are great. But I've also noticed just in the last few meetings a noticeable crescendo of activity and passion coming into it, where in the beginning everybody was kind of trying to feel each other out and get an idea of what kind of traction we were going to get. And again, I know Councillor Pachariva and I have talked about this the last little while. Again, you can really see momentum coming, and I'm very happy to see that, which is great. I'm also very happy to see, and you brought it up, Mr. Chair, about the importance of that AT lens, and we've talked about this in committee meetings, and I think it was stressed here tonight by yourself and Councillor Pachariva about that importance on our infrastructure projects now, 3 years out, 5 years out, just to make sure that we are really trying to build as best we can. I know it won't be able to be applied to every project, but to bring that into as many projects as we can to try to build that whole complete community for everybody. I think that's great. And one last point would be, again, thinking about how AT really will also filter in with our tourism strategy. And we had a meeting earlier this week about how tourism potentially is going to be changing, and Lincoln taking on a new role potentially. And I think the AT component of that is very, very underdeveloped, and I think just in discussions that we've had in our committee, how much, once we get a much broader and larger scope of what AT could be for this community, how much traction that can bring as far as tourism goes, newcomers coming in, repeat visits, and once they see the value and some of the beauty that we have in this community, again, you'll start seeing a lot more uptick in some of those numbers. So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Michalak.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. Just want to thank you guys for coming out and being part of this committee. It's great to see many different members of the community get together and collaborate and come up with some fantastic ideas. I can say as a counselor that I have felt the presence of the committee when proposals are brought up, and where's the bike lane? Where's the sidewalks? So you guys are making a difference in our decision. One thing I didn't see in the areas of focus, are you addressing the trail system, the hiking trail system at all? I saw here improving cycling and trail infrastructure, but I wasn't sure if it was cycling and trail pertaining to cycling or if it's walkable trails as well.
Sure, indeed, through you, Mr. Chair, that is, that's our intent. So I apologize, the presentation has been very cycling heavy, but that is indeed the intent. So we are providing that sort of a lens to the transportation master plan and the parks, recreation, and cultural master plan as well. We feel that all encompasses what it means to have active transportation in the community. And in fact, we've often looked at the plans for Progich Park and some of the ideas that have been proposed for the Prudham's Landing area. So indeed, trails and the connectivity that provides is really core to what we're talking about at the committee as well.
Thank you for that answer. And the reason why I asked that is, a couple weeks ago, I was wandering around, me and my wife, in the Rockaway area, those trails. I got lost. I got lost in those trails, and they weren't signed at all. And I wasn't the only one lost. There was a whole bunch of us lost. And I had my phone, and fortunately, I was able to figure my way out of the trail system. And I'm hoping that the signage will pertain to those trails down in the forest as well. That's all, thank you.
Councillor Patriva?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Bernay. I just wanted to echo Councillor Russell's comments. I mean, the committee has got such a vast background, different background, but it's truly exciting to see them grow and prosper. Having kind of started this from infancy with Councillor Bernay last term under the CAO and Mayor Easton's blessing and getting everyone to look at it. The veracity now of the committee, to want to comment on everything, I think is dynamite. I think you've taken that vision and the goal that Councillor Bernay and I had, and you've run with it, and you've not only are running with it, you're racing with it. At our last committee meeting, we had a presentation from Sue Morin from, the Niagara Cycle Network, and, she brought up a couple items. She highlighted the bike ladder at the backside of Hickson up to Kinsman Park that, out-of-towners know about, but we need to spread that word to our community that it's here. And, she brought up a point about Pioneer Day a few years ago, that cyclists aren't welcomed. And the face on the committee was aghast. And by creating a cycle corral and moving this to different events, this becomes an encouragement. So it's like a light bulb went off in the collectiveness of the group to say, okay, this has happened in the past, and it's not going to happen under our watch. So kudos to the group, to coming to wanting to look at everything, to wanting to comment everything, because that's how change is going to be manufactured. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your effort, and just happy to be a part of it.
Chair, if I may, we've had some great assistance, over the last number of years through the councillors that have been present on the committee and through staff as well. So we as a committee are thankful for that. So thank you.
Mayor Easton?
Mr. Chairman, these gentlemen really are going to leave with the big heads here if we're not careful. But the truth is that what we're starting to see transform our community is community interest groups like yourselves. So to have 9 people on a committee that would be behind these events that you're planning is really pretty remarkable, because it just can't happen without committed people. The two of you don't even look like cyclists to me. Do you ride? My gosh, all I can say is you look like businessmen that just dropped in to give a report. So good for you. You set a good example for all of us. But the wording that I'm particularly interested in is on page 56, where it says that the committee will take a more strategic and coordinated approach towards active transportation. And the way I read that is that in the past, it has been extremely difficult, and I'll use the Trails plan as the example. A lot of money was obtained to create that Trails master plan, and it is a very, very good plan. And there was quite a bit of work done. And then it stopped because there just wasn't anybody out there that was available to ask questions and to keep pushing. And so other priorities started to emerge, and pretty soon that was just completely pushed out of the way. It was totally eroded. And so I think this is really very, very good news. This committee, the Age-Friendly Committee, some of the other public advisory committees, this is truly the transformation of our community as a whole, to have the advisory committees as active as they are. And it is a real relief to me, and I'm hoping that it is a relief for council, that to have another form of input, you can't just put a value on that from a monetary perspective. But from the perspective of growing the community, it's just outstanding. It will just take us from strength to strength. And I want to thank all of you for the contributions that you've made. And I know we had a little hiccup there as the Transportation Master Plan came in, and you probably weren't quite as involved as you're going to be, but you've obviously managed all of that very graciously, and we appreciate it and just look forward to seeing more of you. Thank you very much.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I knew I should have got in before the mayor with that lovely comment that she's making. And I would commend you two and the other members of the Active Transportation Committee. You know, when Councillor Patrieva and Councillor Bernay kicked this off a number of years ago, you know, I felt it was the committee that was going to make the biggest impact on this community, you know, and I still feel that way, that the work that's going on in active transportation can transform this community. So commend you for your work, and keep going and keep pushing. I would not want to miss an opportunity to put a couple of plugs in with you for things that I've been pushing for, and that is a safer Jordan Hollow. And and you're gonna need to push, you know, hard, and push with the region, and push, you know, through the councilors, and we need to figure that out. The other project that I think we're looking at down the near road is potentially access from Prudhome's to Jordan Harbor. You know, whether that's a over highway, under highway, something. You know, I mean, we see them in other communities where there is walking paths across the QEW. You know, there's one right here in Stony Creek. You know, so something that would open up that whole harbor and you know, possibly all of Jordan to, you know, what could be 3,000 or 4,000 people that are coming to live there. So something to start planting the seed now, you know, as far as how do we make that accessible and obviously making it safe. So those are two things that I think, you know, the Active Transportation Committee can help significantly in pushing, because if we're hearing it from the residents, it means a lot. And what I mean by residents, I mean by the committee. You know, and it's not always the elected officials that you know, get what they want. It's if residents are pushing for these things to happen, it means a lot to us as elected officials and to those at the region. So commend you for what you've done, and great presentation tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Just a couple of comments. So I see that committee members, we have 2 members, Chair Bowles and Mr. Chettle returning, and other than that, all new members, so a great new blood coming to the committee, and certainly, you know, when we launched the committee, I believe we had 5 committee members, as well as Councillor Patrieva and I. You've now got 9 plus 2, so, you know, you've got the numbers there to, you know, to make sure that you can hit quorum and do the heavy lifting. So, you know, it looks like you have the fabric for a great committee. Great to see Mr. Wiley on there. You know, in our first couple of years, we had Mr. Wiley making sure that he was holding our feet to the fire on a lot of things in the agricultural community, and now he's part of active transportation, so that's great to see. Just a couple of comments. You know, I believe that, you know, one of our biggest takeaways was the 20 Valley School and the work we did there. You know, and it's come to fruition with the recent community safety zone. We started to do some work at Senator Gibson. We didn't get that to the finish line, but I think we set the, you know, the roots there. Regrets that we didn't get anything done in Jordan or Jacob Beam or St. Mark's. Bike Friendly Award, you know, like you say, we got the, you know, the recognition, and I think that, you know, the framework is there to take that to the finish line. So I guess my only comment would be, we now have the Transportation Master Plan and the Parks Master Plan as a document, which is a futuristic document to take us to 2040. I believe, you know, that document clearly states that active transportation comes with a cost. And so I would only make a comment that I think it's very important for the AT committee moving forward to prioritize and to highlight, you know, some of the specific areas when we talk about trails and that, so that we can make sure that we work collectively with staff and with community services and our director of planning. And, you know, when Director Graham says he can't cut a tree down on Rittenhouse Road, where there's a will, there's a way. So thank you very much for everything you're doing. That wasn't a shot, Director Graham. That was just a comment to say, you know, through discussion and collaboration and communication, we can try to work together so that we're looking at development and growth through the active transportation lens. Thank you very much. So we have a motion to receive and file the AT Citizen Advisory Committee 2019 Annual Report. And we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Patrieva. All in favor? And that is carried. We are now considering item 8.4, CS 28-19, Legacy Beautification, Gardens and Tree Plantings through the Whipple Trust Fund. Are there any questions from council? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a question about the Whipple Trust Fund and, you know, for the request that's being made, if I have my numbers right, it's going to take it down to about $79,000. First question is, what happens with those that are applying generally for the Whipple Trust Fund each year? What happens this year? Through you, Mr. Chair, to Director McKay, I guess.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So you're speaking of 2020.
Correct.
So in speaking with the treasurer and acting director of finance, she assured me that we can still proceed with the call out for applications for 2020 with about the same amount that we have been in the past, because we have always been taking from the interest. So we may have to take a little bit more from the principal to keep that about the same amount, but we traditionally also haven't spent the interest every year that we've made available to the community, if you will.
Thank you. So the numbers would then put us at a, you know, roughly a $75,000 number or a $77,000 number, somewhere in there. And, in looking at the average interest to get us back up to where we generally would be, would take us 10 years to get back to that 100,000 mark. Is that fair?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that's a fair statement.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Petriva.
Thanks, Chair Bernay.
I was on, but I don't see my name in the queue.
No, I only had one name on here.
Oh, I am on. Okay, I am on.
Yeah, I didn't have you up here, but anyway, Councillor Timmers, sorry.
Okay. All right, thank you, Chair Bernay. I was prepared to speak right after Councillor McPherson, so. The Whipple Trust Fund, from what, like, I've been involved in the allocation and the request for the past, all of last term. I understand that it was to be used only for floral and within the town of Beamsville. So I'm just wondering, I see tree planting in Jordan and Camden. I'm just wondering, were we unclear of what the funds were allocated for?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. No, what the funds were allocated for, so if you look on page 1, the exact verbiage, which is one sentence in the will, is for the creation and maintenance of floral program in Village of Beamsville. That is correct. So what we are proposing is to take amounts for both tree planting, you're right, and floral in Beamsville, but not in the other areas. The other areas that were identified in the semi-annual anniversary report are being funded elsewhere. They're not being
Okay,
funded through
okay.
this.
I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yes.
And just one other question, well, two-part. As for the tree planting in Camden, what location are you looking at? Like, where would you plant?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the council, that hasn't been decided yet. So
Okay.
the committee has, at this point, the semi-annual celebration anniversary committee has only decided that 50 trees should be planted, but they haven't identified the locations yet.
Okay. And just one other question. There was a lot of discussion last evening around the tree bylaw that, we were proposing. There was a lot of discussion around that the trees be native to our area. So hoping that they are and will be.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, absolutely. As you heard our arborist say last night, all of the tree plantings that have taken place this year are.
Are native. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Petriva.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bernay. And through you, I mean, the testament of Mrs. Whipple, on page 1 of the report, the creation and maintenance of floral program in the Village of Beamsville, Old Public School grounds and Mount Osborne Cemetery, Business District on King Street, and the fairgrounds. Doesn't say anything about a floral display at Town Hall or various tree plantings. And you know what? And having been on the BIA, and the BIA used to access funds for this, for the downtown beautification, for hanging baskets, for things like this. And then to find out that at some point in time, there was a change made to the funding. So instead of distributing that $2,500 a year, we only were distributing $1,100. So we talked about the BIA being self-sufficient, but if this is something that they can access, then they should be accessing it. And we used to access it. And, again, and Councilor McPherson touched on this, it's supposed to be the interest. So if the principal has accrued to $121,000, I feel very at ill of taking it below that, because that was not the intent of the trust. You want to take $21,000 out of it, leave it at $100,000, and let it continue to grow, I'm fine with that. But dipping below that mark, and again, we talk about openness and transparency. So community groups are eligible to apply for the fund. And then the town, the town administers that application process along with the counselor. But if the town is also applying for the funding, you're setting up a picking winners and losers here. And I'm ill at ease at that. Money's set out in a specific bequeath of the trust, and we should adhere to that. So, those are my comments.
Director McKay?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. So what is stated in the will is exactly in that first paragraph, and it does state maintenance of floral program to be used for, but not limited to. So that language is actually in the will. Therefore, it could be used in other areas in the village of Beamsville, or the town of Beamsville is how we interpret that. As to the comments about the interest only being used, that was a staff report and council approved. That was not what was written in the will. And so, quite honestly, had the town at the time chosen to spend it all on floral programs, they could have. The reports came from the finance staff as to how. And if you see under the criteria on the next page, under number 2, it does stipulate in that criteria that town departments may also apply. So there were a number of years when the town did. The historical records have been difficult, and there's a lack of detail in them. So between 2000 and 2011, in the amount of approximately $18,000, there were programs that the town had applied for and used the funds. Since 2011, however, there have been no requests or submissions for that. We're not sure why, but that's the current state. Staff feels strongly that this does align nicely to the will and testament and the intent. These are going to be legacy gardens. They are new. They're not for plantings that already exist. And the trees that will be planted will be commemorative trees. Whether or not they honor individuals or special events, we haven't gotten to that detail. So I think in making the ask of council to approve this, we feel that it appropriately aligns to the intent of the bequeathed monies of Helen Whipple.
Councilor Patriva, anything further to add?
Yeah, so through you, Chair Bernay, so, okay. So staff recommended that we use the interest. So does that mean we're going to ask for a recommendation to change that original recommendation? Because you're dipping into the principal. So it was 90, went up to 121. So if you're going back to just use the interest, that would be 31,000.
So through you, Chair, to the councillor, that's basically what this report is asking council to approve, is that we go beyond that for this purpose to align with the activities that are being planned for next year. And just to let you know, when staff prepared that report back in September or October, they did include that provision in that report identifying that this report would be coming. The monies for this, the $42,500 that we're asking for, have not been budgeted into the operating that we are bringing you forward. So if it is not approved tonight by council and council's wish to not proceed as such, we will need to get very creative and strategic and reevaluate if we can do what we told you we could do in celebration for the anniversary next year.
Okay, thank you, Director Graham, for that. Councilor Patriva, anything?
Well, yeah, follow up, when we originally received this application back in September, questions were raised around this. We had the tour the other day of Lynn Haven, or Linwell Gardens, not Lynn Haven, because that's the seniors' home in St. Catharines. Linwell Gardens, there's enough floral operators out there, and I think this goes back to the same question around that Councillor Russell had raised with the dog park. Like, there's got to be some sponsorship opportunities available to go and get the raw materials to do this. So, you know, over the time when the report was presented in October, and then there was some of those red flags raised, I would have hoped to come back tonight with, okay, yeah, we heard your concerns. We've went out and we've secured $10,000 or $20,000 worth of sponsorship. But I don't see that. So just wondering where we go. And again, having, you know, went through these discussions last year on, you know, well, if you don't grant us this, it's not going to happen. You know what? I heard that last year. And I don't want to hear it again.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mikulak.
Thank you, Chair Brune. I just, a little bit new to this Whipple Fund, and fill me in on this a little bit, being new to this. Like, this, we may have, as a council, previous council may have went with the interest only and leave the principal alone concept back when interest rates we were receiving 10, 12, 15%. I'm not sure when this was all done. Currently, I think interest rates are returning 1.5%. If it's 1.5%, that's maybe $1,500, $2,000. I don't know if that really buys a whole lot nowadays. So to say that, you know, thank you very much, Mrs. Whipple, in perpetuity, you know, we're not really maintaining a whole lot or receiving a lot for $1,500 on $100,000. So I think when times are lean, with regards to return on interest, I think to maintain the integrity of this request that was made in a will, to make it a meaningful contribution to the community, I think we may have to entertain the idea of perhaps at times when interest rates are low, dip into the principal a little bit. And that's just my feeling, unless I, you know, I can be proven different. Yeah, that's just a comment to that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Brune. I personally don't have a problem with this at all. I think it's a really good plan. It does state in the will that it's not limited to, so that kind of opens the door. It's not limited. Using just the interest alone, that was a staff decision. That was not Mrs. Whipple's. She did not state that in her will, from what I see and from what I understand from years back. And, you know, when these asks come forward, we've got this little bit of interest money, and they're asking for you know, whatever, floral baskets hanging. It's very minor little asks. And this has been going on for, you know, a long time, years and years and years. And it's not really, you know, it has a small impact, whereas this is a very meaningful impact, long-term, for the community. So I totally am good with this. I support this completely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I certainly understand Councillor Patrireva's motivation behind questioning this. The difference between this trust and the other major trust in the town that stipulates only interest be used is really that fact. And so there was an experience a few years ago, and I can find you at least 4 motions that have been written over the years by different council members who wanted to break the Tufford Trust for the very reason that it was an easy place to find money. And at one time, there was a very large piece of equipment that was purchased by the town, and it was in total violation of the terms of that trust. And it took me a long time to find out that information from the previous CAO. And so it leaves you with a very uneasy feeling. Trusts are trusts. So in this case, the interest rate was a practice that was developed. When the Fleming Center was built and the fairgrounds didn't exist anymore, the stone that had her name put on it, I think it's been very nicely placed at the entrance. So we could say that we won't drain this trust entirely. And there may be a few years, in keeping with what Councillor Mikulik is saying, there may be times when there's only $1,500. And so maybe in those years, it's reserved for use just in that one bed there, you know, as the entrance to the Fleming Center. So we've got, let's see, it's $100,000, where are we at right now? 121. So we're planning to take out
42.5.
42.5 and 22.5, is that correct? Are we taking out the 22.5 or just this? Just this one? Okay. So if we took out 42.5 and we left the balance in, and our goal was to build it back up to 100,000 and then continue to use the interest only in that one flower bed, this trust would last for a long, long time. So it's a matter of whether or not, I did not know this woman. I don't think any of us know who she is. I think Ray Conkle's the only person who knew Helen Whipple. But I do know that this was a woman that felt that in a community such as ours, that there was never seemed to be any money or any priority to having nice plantings throughout Beamsville in particular, and it was disturbing to her. And that could be folklore or not, but that's what I understand about the situation. So, you know, I want to be conscious of the disregard that has occurred sometimes in the past, but this is an excellent program. So I would say that we should support this project, but then I think we should sit down and maybe we need to rewrite how we're going to administer this, keeping in mind her main platforms. And as long as we're doing that, we should be able to keep ourselves on, you know, we should be able to honor her. The problem with trusts is, and we have experienced this with the Rittenhouse Trust, there are many of them. They become difficult as time goes by because circumstances change and some of the things that are even identified no longer exist. The fairgrounds no longer exists, for example. And so anyway, those would be my comments. I would just take some care. I think this floral arrangement looks great. We should try and get some sponsorships if we can. Let's just, you know, show some regard for the longevity of this if we possibly can, and have the staff do some work in the future and have another look at it in the new year. But I can support this as a one-time expenditure, given the amount of money that's in there. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Easton. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I like Councillor Mikulik and likely Councillor Reimer. I don't have the background with the Whipple Fund. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Councillor Reimer, but just in case you may not either. Again, I don't have the background with the Whipple Fund and, again, some of the historical comings and goings and changes to policies. I am happy to hear Ms. McKay, again, delineate that not limited to clause in the will. I think that actually does change my opinion for what I think this can be used for. Just a couple little things for my own clarification. The 50th anniversary trees with dedication plaques, what would be on those dedication plaques? Would there be any indication that of Mrs. Whipple herself or some memorial to her as part of that, because the trust is coming from her? Like, is there any connection there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, we could certainly look at that. We haven't gone that far into sort of planning that, so that's something that the committee could certainly discuss.
Okay. That's good to hear. And again, just my own little logical sense, or over logical sense. Again, I know what some of the past usage has been flowers and more or less annuals from what I've conceptualized. But again, the planting of trees is something, especially if it's dedicated or there's some memorial to her, that's long lasting, where people are going to maybe one day come across that name, and again, it'll mean more than just a conversation we have once a year about how these funds are going to be dedicated. again, there's real memorial and there's real actual gratitude placed there. So this is my comment.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Pachariva.
Thanks, Chair Brunei. And in no way, shape, or form am I against the project. It's just I'm ill at ease with where the money's coming from. You know, Mayor Easton alluded to it, and I was on council when we took the money from the Tufford Trust and purchased a piece of equipment and then modified that equipment, and it became redundant. So trusts are often fodder for a quick hit. The fact that this fund was generating $2,500 a year in interest, and we were only spending $1,100, my Spockian eyebrow was raised. So, again, BIA presentation. BIA used to always use this fund for allocation. You know, we saw that presentation the other night. Talked about, you know, $30,000. That was for 2 years. And when the levy came on, well, this is a way that they can reduce that. So it's just, I'd like to, you know, have a fulsome look at things. And if it's going to be $2,500 or whatever that amount is, let's set it up going forward and adhere to what it says.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if we can't come to, you know, some compromise here, Councillor Pachariva, in that, you know, in the report, there is a paragraph that talks to additional funding and talks to specifically going out for applicable grants and innovative funding programs, as well as the intent of staff to submit an application in January to TD Friends of the Environment Foundation and in partnership with Green Lincoln. And if we can't maybe have a target of half of the 42,000, you know, and I also think this might be something we may want to approach some of our good service groups and, you know, BIA in saying, you know, hey, this is a one of, you only turn 50 once, and, you know, hey, Rotary, you know, we could, you know, really use, you know, $5,000. Hey, BIA, you know, here's what we're thinking about doing in downtown Beamsville. Can we source some of your funding to help us with this initiative? So, you know, it looks like these grants are going out fairly quickly, and the last comment is if successful through funding programs and community sponsorships, the allocation of the Whipple Trust Fund will be reduced accordingly. Does that make sense? And can we have that commitment, you know, that there is a initiative to offset as much as we can of the 42,000.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, that is absolutely the intent, and to secure sponsorship and grants and be creative and innovative in where we look for money. And we know we have other activities and events taking place next year that we'll be doing that for. So we will get smart and strategic about how we market all of that to businesses and community groups. But we're not there yet in knowing what those efforts and those results will yield. So this is the ask right now, but we will continue. And if we are successful, we will continue to reduce the ask and the draw from the principal of the Whipple Trust Fund.
So I am willing to support the report based on that paragraph.
Okay. Councillor Timmers.
Sorry, Chair
That's
Bruni, I
okay.
just have to add just a couple of things. Just listening to the discussion, you know, I still support this completely. I think what Mayor Easton and Councillor Pachariva said, moving forward, we need to get something in place of how we're going to use this, and we adhere to it. We have to set some kind of, because it was never really clear. So I think we need to do that. And I also liked Councillor Russell's idea of honoring Mrs. Whipple somehow through these legacy pieces that are like trees or whatever, or the floor, whatever that's going to be there long-term. I think that would be a great way to honor her. And anyway, that's final comments on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Lots of conversation, lots of discussion. So if I'm understanding committee's comments, we do have a motion here. Before I read it, then, it will be my understanding, and I want to make sure that we understand from staff and from our CEO that you know, we will read the motion and then vote on it, but that we will expect from staff to be as aggressive and as vigilant in looking at any funds moving forward as we could possibly be to offset what is in the motion. Is that correct? I'm seeing nodding of heads from our community services. Thank you very much. So, we have a motion to receive for information report CS 28-19 regarding the creation of new legacy beautification gardens and tree plantings in Beamsville. Proposed to be funded through the Whipple Trust Fund during Lincoln's semi-centennial year in 2020. And to approve the allocation of $42,500 from the Whipple Trust Fund principal amount towards these legacy beautifications projects during Lincoln's 50th anniversary in 2020. And we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor McPherson.
No question.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if we couldn't have a slight amendment to the motion that would include verbiage speaking to the plan to go looking for other funding. Does that make sense?
So, somebody want to prepare a motion then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could take a moment, and maybe it's just adding another line to that particular motion that says, and that staff be directed to seek offsetting sponsorships, and we can maybe use some of the wording. I think Trish can work on something, understanding the general intent of what I think, tried to suggest there. There's some wording actually in the report that speaks to it, so maybe we just take some of that wording and incorporate it into the motion.
Do we need to do that now and reread it and vote on it? Or is it taken that staff will?
I mean, through you, Mr. Chair, if I could suggest that staff understand the general intent of what you want in that particular motion, and we will circulate that motion, but it is in the report, and so we will add a line that speaks specifically to, and that staff continue to seek opportunities to diversify external funding, and if and where possible, offset the allocation to the Whipple Trust Fund and reduce accordingly.
Council okay with that?
Good.
Thank you
Good,
very much.
That's good. Very good.
Thank you very much. So I have a mover of the motion, Councillor Timmers. All in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. So we are now considering item 8.5, PW 34-19, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Greenstream. Are there any questions from council? There being no discussion, we have a motion to receive for information report PW 34-19 regarding the Town of Lincoln submissions to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure, ICIP Greenstream, and authorize the Chief Administrative Officer to sign the ICIP applications for submissions. And we will require a mover for the motion. Councillor Reimer, all in favor? Anyone opposed? And that is carried. We are now at confidential items, and we have no confidential items to consider this evening. Do we have any staff remarks? Seeing none, do we have any committee remarks? Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I should have jumped in here on this last report, but very pleased to see this report, you know, especially when looking at, you know, things like stormwater drainage out in that area, and, you know, the greening of the community, you know, with you know, porous roads and town square, if you will. So very, very supportive of this application. Hopefully, we can get all we can close to that number that's listed in there, and I think it'll help offset some of the costs of this major project. So just wanted to make sure that, you know, I got those comments out, meant to do it with the report, but
No, that's fine.
thank you.
I'm sure Shannon appreciates that. She stuck around all night, so, and great workshop this afternoon, so thank you. Seeing no other business, being no further business, I call this meeting adjourned.